Welcome to the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 214, Rodriguez versus Lemos. I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com, and thank goodness I am not flying solo this week. Back in his chair as usual, bringing the banter, the repartee, and most importantly, the fight-picking expertise is Keith Shilin, the executive producer of the Sherdog Radio Network. Keith, welcome back. Glad you're feeling better. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great, man. My last card, I was 11 for 11 in my picks. You set me up to be really tough. This is a much better card than last week, so I'm feeling pretty good. So how you feeling?
I'm feeling great. I made the best of things last week. Frankly, it was a low stakes card. You know, if I was going to be flying solo on anything, UFC Fight Night 213, Kattar versus Allen was probably the one to do it because, you know, the amount of tape study was moderate. I knew most of the fighters. Like I say, not super high stakes. Allen and Kattar were the only really ranked fighters going into it, and that was one of the multiple fights on the card that didn't teach us shit because it ended terribly and early. And why am I even talking about that card? I'm still mad about it, so let's just move on and talk about this one.
I eliminated it from my memory instantly.
Yeah. Well, and we got to wash it down with Anderson Silva getting his face busted up by Jake Paul, so that was like having shitty dessert on top of shitty dinner. This card, Rodriguez versus Lemos, taking a look at it, I was trying to figure out, is this better or worse than the Kattar versus Allen card? And I think the answer is yes. The top points of this card are as good or better as anything last week. Yeah. The worst fights on this card are, and we'll get to them soon, some of the worst fights the UFC has ever thrown into a cage for your entertainment and mine, folks. And I'm equally excited to preview both kinds of fight because that's how this show rolls. I'll say there's an interesting question here. The UFC strawweight division has existed now for about 8 years. And for that entire 8 years, the same group of 5 women has tossed the title around just in this big round robin. Carla Esparza, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Rose Namajunas, Jessica Andrade, and Weili Zhang. And most of them have fought each other. They're getting to the point where almost all the possible combinations have been made. Some of them have been made more than once. And so the question is starting to rise up. Who's going to be the first one to break in to that, hermetically sealed, circle and be the first one to win a title, or who at least is going to be the next one to fight for a title that's not one of those 5 women? The winner of this fight might be it. This headliner, Marina Rodriguez, Amanda Lemos. Lemos has a little bit more of a tough sell because she lost just 2 fights ago, but Rodriguez is coming in on a real hot streak. She's already fought one of the 5 champs or former champs and came pretty, she had a competitive fight with Carla Esparza, whereas Lemos got destroyed by Andrade in her fight with one of the 5. So if you're a betting man, which I know you aren't, is Marina Rodriguez kind of your lead horse for the next woman outside of those 5 to fight for a strawweight title?
Yeah, if you had to say who's most likely to become a champion, I mean, she's kind of had that pedigree. I mean, we've talked about her ground game. It was always kind of the weakness. She's kind of improved that a long ways, and her striking has always been really dangerous. She's actually really big for the weight class. She's dangerous, but Lemos is really good. This is a great main event.
Oh, I agree with you, and this is really more stuff for us to talk about once we know which of these women wins. But Lemos versus Andrade was the worst possible matchup for Lemos against any of the 5 women that have held the UFC strawweight title. Just a tank of a woman who does most of the same things Lemos does, even better.
And it was the best Jessica Andrade, where she just bull rushes right into the pocket and unloads power shot. I mean, she did the same thing to Caitlin Chikagian. She never even got, Lemos never had a chance to get going.
No. I mean, she didn't even let Lemos sit down. She just choked her out standing. Some Alexei Olenek stuff, at double speed. So that's a fight with obviously, immediate title implications probably. It's very much a strawweight version of Kattar versus Allen in the sense that whoever wins, if the dominoes fall right, might be fighting for a title in their next fight. Neil Magny versus Daniel Rodriguez is a fantastic fight. there are a couple of whopping favorites on this card, more so than your usual UFC, fight night card. I know you don't look at the odds in advance, but there are 2 fighters on this card that are minus 600 or greater favorite, and I don't think either of them is a short notice matchup. They're just mismatches.
Okay.
And we have the obligatory heavyweight slobber knocker, Chase Sherman versus Josh Parisian. But here's the twist: they're both coming off of wins. We got momentum.
I'm trying to figure out the 2 huge favorites.
Tell me if you can guess them.
Almeida maybe stepping up.
Ding ding ding. That's one.
That was wrong. Okay. I mean, Grishin's that's a tough test. I mean, Grishin's a solid vet. Yeah, I have no idea who the other. I mean, but I'm thinking it's either Bautista because Lopez has been out for so long, or Miranda Maverick's got a lot of hype. I'll go Maverick.
You are absolutely correct, sir. Miranda Maverick
Right.
versus Shanna Young is the other one that's a greater than minus 600 favorite.
Yeah,
at least as of Sunday night before fight week. Huh.
Yeah,
we'll talk about it in a few minutes.
We'll parlay on Grisham and Shanna Young. It'll be a nice payday.
Hey, listeners, Keith Shayilan is telling you,
No, I'm not.
drop 100 units on the Grishin and Shanna Young because at least you'll be able to get back to your evening really quickly.
Yeah, God hates cowards. Just gotta go big.
Don't do it. Keith is joking. I'm gonna have to put that in print, like going across the bottom. Shall we dive right into these prelims?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. The first fight out of the gate at UFC Fight Night 214 is a women's bantamweight matchup between Tamires Vidal and Ramona Pascual. Vidal, the 24-year-old Brazilian, is 6-1 overall. This will be her UFC debut. She's fought all over South America and one bout in LFA. That was her last fight. She won by second round submission back in March. She'll be stepping in here to take on Pascual, the 34-year-old Filipina, 6-4 overall, still looking for her first UFC win. She is currently 0-2 in the octagon. She made her debut back in February, lost to Josiane Nunes by unanimous decision, came back at UFC 275 in June, dropped a unanimous decision to Jocelyn Edwards. This will be her third try. Both of her previous fights were at featherweights, and for what it's worth, her last fight outside of the UFC was at, I think, 150-pound catchweight in Invicta. So here she'll be dropping all the way down to 135 to see if that fixes things. She is actually not favored here. Vidal, debuting, slight favorite. She is minus 160, Pascual plus 130 on the comeback. Keith, anytime I'm prepping for one of these fight night cards, obviously a certain amount of tape study has to go first off to the debuting fighters that I may have seen tape on before. I may never have seen any. I had already seen Tamires Vidal fight because, of course, Vidal just about a year ago fought Ailin Perez, who debuted in the UFC just a month or two ago. So I watched that fight then, and I rewatched it this week. I'm not going to say that Ailin Perez versus Tamires Vidal is the worst fight I've ever seen, but it's the worst fight I've ever seen twice. I've seen better fights than that in a Waffle House parking lot. I'm from Houston, baby.
Yeah, he gets
this fight. I mean, it goes down as a win for Vidal. And please, if you're watching this right now, pause our preview. You're already on YouTube probably. Just look up Ailin Perez versus Tamires Vidal. It'll take about 9 minutes of your time, and behold the wonder that unfolds, because this fight, it goes down as a win for Vidal, but nobody is sure why. Ailin Perez absolutely dominates the action. She just thrashes Vidal, throws her around, gets in some ground and pound, just pounds on Vidal while Vidal's trying weird low percentage submissions. But she basically, Perez fills an entire bingo card of fouls. She does some 12-6 elbows. She hits her in the back of the head a bunch of times. She, I think, knees her to the head while she's down. The fight ends, and they decide to disqualify Perez after the final horn. It's some shady shit. And Perez loses her mind, like starts screaming and crying. It's embarrassingly bad. But I mean, that's Vidal's best win, and it's a win just like losing her way to victory. She got her ass kicked. I'm not saying Pascual is good, but Pascual has been competitive in losses with 2 UFC level fighters, and Vidal has not. Like, I don't see the upside here. She's not particularly big or athletic for the weight class. She's kind of a sloppy slugger. Her ground game is badly lacking. If both these women make 135, I think like Pascual's going to be taller. She's going to have better reach. She's a better boxer. Vidal might be able to take her down, but it's not like, Vidal is not like a steamrolling takedown machine. I think this probably just turns into kind of a sloppy battle on the feet between a bad boxer and a slightly better, taller, like rangier boxer. I mean, give me the upset right out the gate. Give me Ramona Pascual to get her first UFC win by decision. And yeah, and then we will never speak of this fight again, because this really is, on paper, in terms of the fighter's accomplishments, one of the worst fights the UFC has ever pushed in front of us. This is low level stuff, and I think there's a really solid chance one or both of these women blow weight. Like, if we end up with a 145-pound fight or a 140 catch weight, I'm not surprised at all.
This you said you've seen better fights at the Waffle House. As long as it doesn't happen at Buc-ee's, because Buc-ee's is a nice family place out in Texas.
Buc-ee's, and dude, I've never seen anything bad at Buc-ee's. Buc-ee's is like,
fantastic.
It's this nirvana utopia. Like, people from all races, colors, creeds, nationalities just get along beautifully in Buc-ee's. They just want some like caramel corn and some barbecue, and take a whiz in like one of 40, a row of 40 urinals, and then go about their day. Selling
his art for sale on the wall of the gas station bathrooms. I was absolutely fine. It's the most memorable thing. I went to Texas, as you know, to the listeners. I went to Texas last May, so May 2021, first time going to Texas, and I think of all the things I saw in Texas, I think Buc-ee's was the most impressive thing ever. There was like one of them had like 150 pumps. I couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. And
Keith is not exaggerating.
It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it.
The Buc-ee's in between the big cities, like in between Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin.
That's where it was.
They have over 100 pumps easily, and I think their design, they have to have as many pumps as they have bathroom stalls. So at one of those big ones, you go into the bathroom, and the bathroom is the size of 2 regular gas stations.
Like, somebody, if you work for Buc-ee's and you listen to the show, like, reach out to your boss, something like, let's get us a sponsorship with Buc-ee's. Like, I will pump the shit out of Buc-ee's. I love it. I wear I got a tank top just when I went there. I wear a Buc-ee's tank top every single time I come on here.
And so, guys, Buc-ee's, send Keith some t-shirts, because y'all don't want to see Keith in. Don't want to see Keith in a tank top like that Irish ass tan of his, that ginger tan.
Looking like Ed Herman over here. I'd much rather talk like that. I love that you describe Vidal as like her best chance of victory is like go Mike Jackson route. Like, only chance of winning is getting disqualified. It's not good when you're describing 2 fighters and Ramona Pascual is the one you describe as the better boxer. Like, that's never a good sign. I was looking. I don't know if you caught me. Like, I couldn't find my notes for this fight, and then I realized they're in the trash over there, because this is terrible. All right, I'll try to be professional. Pascual she's a southpaw. She's really big for the weight class. I mean, we described before. She's a thick woman. Not very athletic at all. I shouldn't say not very. Like, she's not athletic at all. I don't think she can like rollerblade. That's not happening. She's very lumbering. She's flat-footed. Her strikes are slow. She throws these looping shots. She's so slow. I wrote it twice in my notes for some reason. She lacks power because. A lot of arm punches. I'll give her. She has like decent kicks because of thudding. She has these big legs. She's heavy on the front foot, so she's open to calf kicks. She's bigger, so she can get in the clinch. And I don't mind her in the clinch. She was effective against Jocelyn Edwards with knees inside in the clinch, and she will look for takedowns. She took down Josie Nunes 3 times, but she's like her top game is not good. She doesn't have a single submission on her record. Move on to Vidal. Vidal's only 24 years old, so I do like that. She also has a very good record, but her tape looks bad, like really bad. I mean, she's pretty soft in the midsection too. Like, she isn't a great athlete. She's very plodding. She throws single strikes. She doesn't cut off the cage. She wings an overhand, but she really overextends, so it leaves herself open to counters. She throws naked leg kicks, so she's open to counters, or just like a kick getting caught. She will shoot in for takedown, but she isn't really a powerful wrestler. There's no setup on it. She does like some body lock takedowns, and she will catch a kick to get the fight to the ground. She does have 2 submission wins, and I seen her jump a guillotine. I think it was her very last fight. She got a submission jumping a guillotine, and she likes leg locks. I know it was a heel hook in her last fight that she got. But she's willing to give a position to go for it, and she isn't some like wizard on the ground. I mean, her one loss came by submission. So I just said how I actually kind of like this fight card. Like this is terrible. Like this should be a regional fight, and not even like a good regional fight. I was thinking of taking Vidal just because she's younger and she should improve, but I can't believe we're both doubling down. I'm going with Pascual. The one thing I know about Pascual is she is strong. I think she can maybe get to the clinch, win a grueling, grinding type decision. So I'm with you. I'm going to take Pascual by upset and decision win.
Next up at UFC Vegas 64 is a men's flyweight matchup between Jake Hadley and Carlos Candelario. Both these gentlemen fought last on the same card in May. That was the UFC on ESPN Blachowicz versus Rakic card. The first of about 15 cards this year where the main event ended due to a freak injury, but that's neither here nor there. Both men lost that night. Hadley, the 26-year-old from Birmingham, is 8-1 overall. He is 0-1 in the UFC. The one that lost, a unanimous decision to Alan Nascimento back in May. He'll be looking to get back on track against Candelario, 31-year-old from New Britain, Connecticut, teammate of Parker Porter, I believe. He is 8-2 overall. Like Hadley, he started his career 8-0 and has run into trouble since then. He lost on the Contender Series last August. That was actually his second appearance on the Contender Series. He was on season 1 all the way back in 2017. He won, wasn't signed by the UFC, disappeared for 4 years from the sport, came back in August of last year, won one more fight in CES where most of his regional career had taken place, then got the call up to the Contender Series again. He fought on like 3 weeks notice against Victor Altamirano, dropped a close decision. He got signed in May to face Tatsuro Taira, lost a unanimous decision to Taira. No shame there. Taira is one of the more exciting prospects in that division, but he is going to try to not make it 3 in a row. He is not favored to get it done. Hadley is minus 285, Candelario plus 240 on the comeback. Keith, I know that, despite the famous dynamic being that you're harsh on New England fighters, you had to be aware of Candelario on some level back. Well, for one thing, you were previewing the Contender Series back in season 1. So you knew him from CES, you knew him from the Contender Series. Were you surprised when he disappeared, or were you surprised when he reappeared?
Yes. So I've known him since I saw him knock out Marquise Brewster, who was actually a pretty good prospect. Well, he's not a prospect, he's like 37, but he was undefeated as a pro. He knocked out Marquise Brewster as an amateur like 10 years ago or something like that. That's kind of when I started following Candelario. Candelario, the reason why he took off for a while, one, he had a major injury, but this is the guy that he's pretty honest about. He really suffered some like anxiety issues and mental, like the mental part of the game, which is weird because he was a really good prospect. It's really nice to see him kind of turn around, handle a loss. Like he lost in the Contender Series, though I actually thought he won that fight. But he lost his UFC debut. So for him to come back, I was worried that we wouldn't see him again. Like, there you go. Mm-hmm. The fact that he's coming back and he's fighting tough guys, like getting tossed to
Tyra?
Tyra, his last fight, and now he's going.
And it was Altamirano on the Contender Series.
Altamirano and Hadley here. Like that's 3 really tough guys that he's getting matched up with. So he's a southpaw. He's got some good technical boxing. He has these really long, deceiving arms. He likes to lead with his power left. Like he's one of the guys. He'll throw that backhand a lot. He throws a lot of combinations. I like that he works the body. His fade back counter is probably his best strike. He can lose some power because he loses his base. He'll like throw himself into his shots and kind of lose his footing a little bit, which I don't like. But he has a really good kicking game. Like he loves it. I love his high kick. He throws it a lot. He is heavy on that front foot because he has a very boxing style, so he's open to leg kicks. He's willing to get inside, clinch. He's a bigger flyweight, I'd say. He's an underrated wrestler. He's got some good entries, good kind of like reactionary double, busy ground and pound. One concern though is that he's a bigger one. That he has faded in fights in the past. Now, Hadley's another guy coming off the Contender Series. Lost his last fight and against another really good fighter, but a guy that I like a lot too. Like Hadley's a southpaw, high volume on his feet. He's also a pressure fighter. He just marches down his foes, keeps everything inside, crisp jab. I love the way that he also targets the body. He does have this weird pillaring where he kind of keeps his right arm across his body, kind of like a Philly shell, but a little different. This really not against his body, across his like face, which leaves him open to his body, which that's why it's different than the Philly shell. Philly shell, the arm comes across the body, but that's what I mean. He's like trying to block with his shoulder a lot, which is more of a boxing style. That leaves him open to body shots. He backs up right on the center line when he's pressured, which I don't like. But he throws really hard body kicks. He's a decent wrestler. He's got a really good top game. Does really well to advance position on the ground, but he's a weaker defensive wrestler. And I think that's because of his style. Like he doesn't mind being off his back. He's very flexible. He puts subs together, kind of chains submissions. Look at his fight against Mitch Raposa, where you just like submission after submission. I mean, he almost had a Google platter on Mitch Raposa, but he struggles on the bottom though. He can be pinned. I should say struggle. Like you could pin him on the ground. Like he plays BJJ a little too much and doesn't really show. What's the word I'm looking for? Like worry. He's not worried being down there. Now he's not worried about losing rounds. So I think it's a really good fight. I think the line should be closer. You said Hadley was what?
Almost minus 300. Like yeah. I'm glad you picked that up because that was my thought as well. Yeah,
I'm not surprised Hadley's the favorite.
Sure.
He's the bigger name. He's kind of like he was the more hype prospect of the two. I give Hadley the edge on the feet in the mid-range, but Candelario, if he can stay at distance with that kicking, like I think he can do well on the outside. And I think Candelario is the better wrestler, especially the way Hadley comes forward and kind of walks into takedowns. Hadley's definitely, even though Candelario, I like his grappling game, Hadley is the better submission threat. But I'm going to go with a massive upset here. I'm going to go with my boy Candelario on an upset. I think he's going to be able to fight off submission attempts. I think he showed in his last fight against Tyra that he was really tough. And Tyra's a really good grappler, but he wasn't able to submit Candelario. I think he's going to be on top. I think he's going to win the position. I think it's going to be really close. But I'm going to say Candelario wins a split decision.
That's awesome. Ballsy pick, dude. I mean, yeah, Hadley came into the UFC with a significant amount of steam behind him. I mean, anytime you get an undefeated Brit who has kind of like an effervescent, cocky personality and whose fights are generally exciting, they're going to get a certain amount of shine because they're hoping that it's the next McGregor or Patty type fighter. Yeah. And I don't think he lost too much steam in that loss to Alan Nascimento in his last fight. Like, of the three of us, you and I and Tom Feely, who does the written previews for Sherdog, we all acknowledged it was like a really close matchup. I was the only one of the three of us who actually picked Nascimento to win that one. I say that not to pat myself on the back, but the reasons that I thought Nascimento would win, like his physical strength, his aggression, the fact that he's just much, much more experienced, because, Hadley is like, at the time he came to the UFC, he was like 4 fights removed from fighting Reese Street, who was like, 8 and 500. Like, Nascimento just, much further along in his development. Like, all those things, a loss is a loss, but they kind of excuse it in that I think we might even have said on the recap, Nascimento and Hadley are both really good prospects for the division, but 2 years from now, if they rematch, Hadley might be a massive favorite just because he has so much more development he can do. I'm interested to see how different he looks than in the Nascimento fight. Candelario, very similarly, they lost on the same night. They both lost decisions, and Tyra was the Hadley of that matchup. Like, Tyra versus Candelario, Tyra's the super young, exciting Japanese prospect coming in. I thought Candelario comported himself really well in that fight. Just he didn't let Tyra really, really go to work on the ground or on the feet. He lost the decision deservedly, but he was not outclassed. And I can absolutely see him having the routes to victory that you mentioned against Hadley. Hadley has to know that those are his best routes to victory. Like, if Hadley really is improving from fight to fight like a top prospect should after his first career loss, hopefully he and his team are ready to manage distance on the feet so as not to give Candelario easy takedowns. If he gets on the ground, hopefully he is not content to just lose a round hunting for submissions while Candelario tries to advance and pelts him with punches and elbows. So I don't feel minus 300 confidence in that, but I am leaning slightly towards it. So like you, I think the line should be way closer than it is here. If I were a betting man, I think I'd see some value here, but I am going to be the square, and I'm going to take Hadley by decision in a fight that hopefully doesn't spell the end for Candelario. Because, as you mentioned, it's a cool story that he's even back doing this thing. He's been very competitive against some very good fighters in his last couple fights. So here's hoping that he is not on the UFC's cut list anyway after Saturday. We head now to the men's bantamweight division for a matchup between Liudvik Sholinian and Johnny Munoz Jr. Sholinian, the 32-year-old Ukrainian, 9-2-1 overall. He is 0-1 in the UFC. He made his debut all the way last September. Got a rough assignment as he took on Jack Shore and dropped a unanimous decision. He is coming back 14 months later and facing Munoz, the 29-year-old Californian, is 11-2 overall. He's 1-2 since joining the UFC out of King of the Cage. He lost his last time out, got knocked out in just 67 seconds by Tony Gravely at UFC Fight Night Volkov versus Rosenstrike back in June. Prior to that, his last appearance was at UFC 265 last August, where he choked out Jamie Simmons in the second round. Munoz is the comfortable favorite here. He's minus 200, Sholinian plus 160 on the comeback. Keith, something I probably should have mentioned off the top, or even just done some quick numbers on it, just about everybody on these prelims is coming off of a loss. And normally that's an unhealthy sign for a UFC undercard where it's just going to be one of those cut list derbies for us. But this one really is not, because most of them are coming off of pretty excusable losses. We just talked about Candelario and Hadley coming off of, there's no such thing as a good loss, but very understandable losses. Here, Liudvik Sholinian made his short notice debut against Jack Shore. That sounds fun. And Johnny Munoz Jr. runs into Tony Gravely, who Gravely's not a perfect fighter, but that's something he's going to do to people every second or third fight for as long as he's in the UFC. Tell me who you think wins this one. And granted, bantamweight is incredibly crowded right now, but tell me if you see any top 15 upside a couple years down the road for either of these gentlemen.
You know who's not coming off a loss? Tamires Vidal. She's not coming off a loss.
Oh no, she's not.
I don't know if either one of these are top 15, especially in this division. I think it's the best division in MMA. And they're both kind of, I'd say Sholinian is more well-rounded, while Munoz is a bit of a specialist, kind of an old-school specialist. Munoz, on the feet, he's a boxer, but he's kind of limited. He holds his hands really weird. He has this his palms facing him like the old.
1890s like fisticuffs, Marcus of Queensberry, like
yeah,
like Penn's last fight against Edgar, where he decided to do that.
Yeah,
Remember
the Jersey man, Johnny Munoz. So he has that kind of thing. I don't know what's going on with that, but he does throw a double jab, so I like that. But he backs straight up on the center line. He's open to leg kicks because he's so heavy on his front foot. And you mentioned it, Tony Gravely. I mean, he knocked him into next week in his last fight. But he's a good, nice reactionary double, and he's an extremely good grappler. He's a multi-time world champion, smothering top pressure, amazing back takes. He's got 7 submission wins. I mean, he really is elite. Sholinian, he's really big for weight class. He's a pressure striker. He has these long arms that he uses kind of deceivingly to kind of close distance and then lands his shots. He's more of a point fighter. He lacks KO power. And I was surprised. I thought he should kind of destroy Mitch Raposa. And he was struggling early with the speed and movement of Mitch Raposa in their fight. But he's a really good wrestler. He's a Ukrainian national team member, good entries. He'll shoot sometimes without a setup. But if he gets on top, solid top control. But he doesn't mind sitting in guard and just stalling, if I'm being honest, winning rounds. So I think this is a good stylistic matchup, a little bit of an old school style matchup. Munoz might struggle to get Sholinian down because Sholinian is the much more decorated wrestler. But I actually think he finds a way to get it down. And once he does, I think he locks in a submission. So, and I wouldn't be surprised if Munoz gets a submission on his back, even though he's more of a topside grappler, but I could see him maybe sweeping, excuse me, get a back take and find a submission. So give me Munoz by second round sub.
Awesome. This is one where I see value in Sholinian. I think he's better than this line looks, but it's a rough style matchup for him for the reasons you mentioned, because Sholinian has paths to victory, but they require him to be more or less perfect. Because Sholinian is the bigger guy. As you mentioned, he should be the better wrestler by far. But his best route to victory would be to use his wrestling in reverse, stay on the feet, and win a low power distance, basically boxing match with Munoz. Just boxing, really, because if he starts kicking Munoz, he's going to end up on his back probably. And without a ton of power, it basically requires him to be perfect. That's concerning to me, and that is why I'm also leaning towards Munoz here. I could see him getting a sub. I could also just see him, getting Sholinian down in 2 rounds out of 3 and just having him in constant peril, and Sholinian just fighting for survival and losing 2 rounds out of 3 really clearly. I'm leaning that direction. Sholinian was surprisingly competitive with Jack Shore, who I think is one of the top guys in the division or on his way there. Certainly gained some respect for him in that performance. So assuming that guy's the guy that rolls into the cage, I think Munoz wins a pretty obvious one-sided decision. But at the very least, Sholinian isn't going to do the Tony Gravely thing to Johnny Munoz. So Munoz has 3 full rounds to do his thing, and Sholinian has to be perfect. That's a tough thing to call. So yeah, give me Munoz by decision.
And if they're going to do a boxing match, let's go old school, like Munoz likes it. 150 rounds, knockout only.
We head now to the strawweight division for a matchup between Polyana Viana and Jinh Frey. Viana, the 30-year-old Brazilian, is 12-5 overall. She's 3-4 in the UFC. She lost her last time out. It was a unanimous decision against Tabitha Ricci at UFC Fight Night Home versus Vieira back in May. Prior to that, she had won back-to-back fights over Emily Whitmire and Mallory Martin. She will try to get back on track against Frey. The 37-year-old Dallas native is 11-7 overall. She is 2-3 since joining the UFC as a former Invicta Atomweight champ, a former Ryzen Super Atomweight title challenger. She lost her first 2 in the UFC, looks on the verge of possibly being cut, but then won back-to-back fights via decision over Gloria DePaula and Ashley Yoder before running into Vanessa Demopoulos back in June at UFC on ESPN Sarukian versus Gamrot, where she dropped a frankly somewhat controversial split decision, but nonetheless, both of these women coming off of losses. almost even money coming into the cage on Saturday. Right now, most outlets have Viana around minus 115 or minus 120, Frey around minus 105 or minus 110, so close to a pick 'em. I'll say right off the bat, Jinh Frey's fight against Vanessa Demopoulos back in June, I scored that fight 30-27 for Frey. I'm somewhat in the minority there. Most people that I saw scored it 29-28 for Frey. And I think I said this on the preview coming into it, and then it was just reinforced afterwards. Even though I thought Frey won that fight 30-27, she really has no one to blame but herself. Jinh Frey has created a fight style for herself that is going to make all of her fights closer than they need to be. She is so low volume. She is so defensively buttoned up and can go so long without just even throwing a strike that her rounds are individually really difficult to score. And obviously it's supposed to go, damage. Damage is king. There's usually not much damage in a Jinh Frey fight, but it's effective striking, grappling, aggression, cage control. If Jinh Frey gets the fight she wants, there usually isn't much grappling. She would prefer to do the Caitlin Chookagian thing and just win a low-volume distance kickboxing fight. But her fights are so sedate at times that aggression actually comes into it. Like, if you value that the other woman's walking towards Frey and Frey is circling out and returning single shots, you can give her the opponent rounds against Frey, and you're not necessarily wrong. So, again, Frey lost a split decision. I didn't agree with it, but I don't blame the judges. Frey has to be like top 3 or 4 all time of the fighters with the worst ratio of how much ass it looks like they're going to kick versus how much they actually do kick. She's right up there with like Lyman Good and Shek Congo. You look at Frey, she's just jacked. Like, if you didn't know that she was an atomweight, you'd be like, I don't want to mess with that woman because she looks like she might be like 5'7" and 160 pounds and could bench press you. And then she's got... Yeah, and then she's got that scowl, that she looks like Damasio Page or something. Just like her glare makes the sponsor decal start peeling off the octagon floor, and then she comes out and throws 9 strikes around, and 3 of them land. It's just, Anyway, Polyana Viana is going to be, she's going to be much taller, much longer reach. Viana's kind of like long and lanky, and generally uses it to good advantage in the cage when she's fighting a woman who can't bully her. Like, she lost to JJ Aldrich. She lost. Hannah Cyphers was not a great UFC strawweight. She's gone, but she was like physically strong and aggressive, and she beat Viana by collapsing the pocket on her and just making her uncomfortable. Ricci did that as well. That's pretty much what has happened in all of Viana's losses. But the things that Ricci did to Viana aren't things that Frey has really done to anybody. She presumably could. You look at Frey, she could certainly run in, just get a body lock and hoist Viana in the air and throw her down. But I'm not picking Frey to start doing that at age 37 when I've never seen it before. Give me Jinh Frey to lose a decision here. And Frey losing by decision is one of the outcomes that I'm probably most comfortable predicting on this card. Like, give me Viana by decision. We could get weirdness. We'll probably get a splitter because the individual rounds are going to be really tough to score. But whether Frey loses or not, we're probably going to be saying she deserved to.
Yeah. Jinh Frey, as you said, she's southpaw that is historically known for her low output. But in fairness, in her last fight, she did pick it up a little bit against Vanessa Demopoulos. So I'm with you. I scored it for her over Demopoulos. I looked at MMA decisions. It was 11-1 for her. But I'm not going to scream foul for her Jinh Frey to win a decision, considering she had 2 fights against Mina Grusander. I scored both of them to Grusander, however you say it. And then she had 2 fights against Ashley Cummins, and I scored one of the fights for Ashley Cummins, and she won all of those decisions. So
all those, and those 3 fights feel like I guess the 2 Grusander fights and the second Cummins fight feel like they collectively took 2 years off my life.
There you go. So I'll say this about her: you're right. She doesn't throw a lot, but she is pretty technically sound. She's a counter striker that when she lets her hands go, she does well like picking up her opponent's rhythm and beating them to the point of contact. She's a very good athlete. I give a little more credit in close, even though she's undersized. Being a former atomweight, she can grind in the clinch, except for what she did against Loma Lumumi, where she got beat up there. But a lot of times she wins that grueling, slow-paced clinch battle. She will look for a takedown to get the fight to the canvas. So she'll drop down a single and like run a pipe or something. She could also shoot on your hips. I'd say her entries are okay, but going back to like the Gloria DePaula fight, she set up a really good ground game. Like I think that's something that she should use more. She looked to pass guard. She's always been tough to take down herself. But if she is pinned on her back, she struggles to get back up because she's usually undersized. She'll be undersized against Polyana Viana. Now, Viana, I'm not interested. Like you seem way more confident in Viana striking than I am. I think she's a one-dimensional fighter. I think she's a grappler. Her striking, she throws a lot of arm punches. She has no power. She pulls her head when she's striking, which zaps even the limited power that she has. She's open to counters because she doesn't really set things up. She doesn't check leg kicks. She keeps her chin high in the air. Despite wanting to get to the fight to the ground, she isn't a wrestler. She will shoot desperately. She'll like dive at opponents' hips. I've seen her even pull guard. She doesn't have a takedown defense. And I think that something has to do with because she wants to get the fight to the ground anyway, so why fight it? No, when the fight hits the ground, she's a serious threat on the bottom. I mean, she's a former BJJ champion, though I always like the really fluke loss to Veronica Macedo by submission. But she got quick subs over Emily Whitmire, over Mallory Martin, so she can kind of get submissions. She can get them in scrambles. She's good at chaining things together. She's a threat off her back. Though, like I say so many times, she get too comfortable. And we saw that against Richie, where Richie was kind of pinning her for long periods of time. But Richie also she's a much better grappler than Frey is. She has a good, well, I should say she has a grappling background. She's more decorated. Yeah. But she showed no urgency in a fight that she was losing. We have seen her hit some sweeps in the back, and if she's on top, she's got some pretty good ground and pound, so I like that. I'm viewing this fight much different than you. I really see Viana's only avenue of victory is catching a submission, or like you said, Frey, just standing on the outside and just not throwing and just getting outpoint against someone that I think she's much more tactically, better of the strikers. So I like that Frey showed against Demopoulos that she's starting to pick up the pace. I also like that she showed against Demopoulos that she's not easy to take down. She's not easy to sub. I think Frey does a good job of keeping it on the feet. I think she doesn't even enter Viana's guard. I think she picks her apart, maybe even battle in the clinch a little bit. Give me Frey by decision.
We head back to the men's bantamweight division and a matchup between Mario Bautista and Benito Lopez. Bautista, the 29-year-old MMA lab product, is 10-2 overall. He is 4-2 since joining the UFC out of LFA and Combate. He is on a 2-fight win streak. Those are a unanimous decision win over Jay Perrin back in February, followed by a first-round submission win over Brian Kelleher at UFC on ESPN Sarukian versus Gamrot in June. He will look to make it 3 straight against Lopez. The 28-year-old Californian is 10-1 overall. He is just 2-1 since joining the UFC out of the very first season of Dana White's Contender Series. And if you're doing some math in your head right now, yes, he has had several lengthy absences from the sport. He won on the Contender Series back in August of 2017, got a decision over Steven Peterson. He fought once, won his UFC debut, disappeared for almost a year and a half, came back and lost to Manny Bermudez, beat Vince Morales in July of 2019, and he has been absent ever since. Almost 2.5 years. Yeah, almost 2.5 years since his last fight. That probably contributes somewhat to the odds here, as Bautista is minus 240, Lopez plus 200. For what it's worth, Lopez has had multiple fights scheduled and has had to withdraw from the majority of them due to injury or illness. So, variety of things conspiring to give him just 3 fights in the last 5.5 years. a span of time over which Bautista has like 10 or 11 fights. But Keith, again, this is someone from season 1 of Dana White's Contender Series, so you at least have a pretty good handle on what he was in 2017 or 2018. He is still just 28 years old. Tell me what's good about this guy, and tell me how you think this fight goes against Bautista.
To be honest, man, I kind of forgot about him. And you said 2.5. It's been 3 years. I mean, he last fought July 2019.
Oh, sorry, yeah, almost 3.5 years.
Yeah, we're over 3 years now since he's fought. And like you said, close to 3.5 years now. And then I watched his last fight against Vince Morales. I thought Morales beat him, and I looked at MMA decisions. It was 11-0 for Morales. So I'm not gonna say robbery because it was a very competitive fight, but I was surprised by that. He's big for the weight class, so that's good. He's very athletic. He's got good movement. He's very elusive. He's a range striker, but he does stand a little tall. He's a big target. He lacks head movement. I mean, he was getting cracked by Vince Morales in his last fight. Again, I have to keep talking about like his last fight because we haven't seen him in 3 years. So I have no idea what we're going to get from him. He's in those prime years, but he lost some prime years. 26, 27. We haven't seen those years. He didn't like the pressure from Morales. He has these long legs, and kicks are such a big part of his game. I like that he feints with his hips. Like he feints his kicks. He throws a lot of kicks, teep kicks, hard calf kicks. He'll toss in some spinning attacks. He likes flying knees. He doesn't have much of a grappling game. Not much of an offensive game. Has a weak takedown defense, been taken down, though he does have 2 submissions on his record, which I do like. Move that over against Bautista. Bautista's been a guy who's been busy. He's been active. He's a well-rounded fighter, a guy who's really has improved over the years. He's a technically sound fighter, a bit of a pressure fighter, uses feints and footwork really good to keep his distance. I go back to his last fight against Brian Kelleher. I mean, he was freezing Brian Kelleher with his feints, cutting angles when he attacks, which shows his footwork. He's not a KO artist, but he can score he can stun a little bit with some shots. He also likes flying knees. He is good in the clinch. Not a great offense wrestler, but he did take Brian Kelleher down in his last fight, who's, comes from a wrestling background. He had a beautiful foot sweep also in that fight, some slick back take. He subbed a good grappler in Brian Kelleher. He showed some good takedown defense against Miles Johns in that fight. But when he has been taken down, he springs back up to his feet. The only concern about him is he's been hurt before. He's been hurt, but he's also faced some really good guys. So as far as prediction goes, to me, this is a huge step up for Lopez. Like, you've been out for 3 years, and you get a guy like Mario Bautista in your return. I like Bautista a lot. I think Bautista can match Lopez's kicking game. I think he can slide in the pocket and really win exchanges there. I think he has a huge advantage in the grappling too. Give me Bautista to put it on Lopez. I think he might hurt him, and I think he might follow it up with shots or lock in a submission. Give me Bautista by second round TKO.
Yeah, I feel pretty much everything you put out on this one. Something that you'll mention pretty often is when an up-and-coming fighter has a long layoff in their 20s, there's always the chance that they are developing and they come back a different and improved fighter. And obviously, you didn't say that here, and that's because the reason for his absence has been just a string of injuries, to the point where, yeah, it probably hasn't improved, and there's even question of whether the guy we get back is the one we had in 2019.
That's a good point.
Like, almost Bautista's entire UFC run has taken place since Lopez's last fight.
Wow, that's
yeah. Like, Bautista debuted in January of 2019. Like, it was like 5 months after that was Lopez's last fight. Debuted against Corey Sandhagen. That's brutal. But I'm with you. I think Bautista, again, these guys are fighting in a really, really crowded division. It's becoming one of the hardest divisions to break into the top 15, let alone into title contention. I mean, look how long people like Merab and Marlon Vera have just been floating around there in the top 5 or putting up incredible win streaks just to get within shooting distance. So we might be a ways off before we're talking about that for Mario Bautista, but I think he's definitely going to be too much for Lopez here for the reasons you mentioned. I think he can meet Lopez and at least hold his own at Lopez's preferred game. And if it goes to the ground, I do think all the advantage is with Bautista there. Give me Bautista by second round finish as well. And I'm going to say, maybe he stings him, gives him some ground and pound, takes the back and chokes him out. Give me Bautista by second round submission. But if I'm being honest, second round TKO, like you called, is probably the more likely of the two. Next up at UFC Vegas 64 is a women's flyweight matchup between Miranda Maverick and Shanna Young. You may remember that this fight was originally scheduled for UFC 278. That was the Usman versus Edwards 2 card back in August. And it had to be canceled, postponed, because Young was hospitalized during fight week, issues related to her weight cut. We actually previewed that fight for the show for UFC 278. So at the time, Keith, Maverick was a big favorite, and you and I both picked her to win by decision. Now, coming into this fight, she's an even bigger favorite. Again, probably just because she's much younger. A couple months have passed. Young had weight issues. None of those things inspire confidence. Do you still feel comfortable with that? Anything you want to change in what we said then?
No, if people want to get it in depth, just check out that preview.
Well, and I will plug that segment in right here, so get ready to go back to your Wayback Machine. Maybe, we'll have different haircuts or more or less of a beard on me, but here it comes. Next up, a women's flyweight matchup between Miranda Maverick and Shanna Young. Maverick, the 25-year-old Missouri native, is 10-4 overall. She's 3-2 since joining the UFC as a standout from Invicta Fighting Championships. She won her last time out. It was a second-round rear naked choke submission of Sabina Mazo at UFC Fight Night Santos versus Ankalaev back in March. That got her back on track after back-to-back losses to Macy Barber and Erin Blanchfield. She'll try to keep the good momentum going against Young. The 31-year-old Virginia native is 8-4 overall. She is 1-2 since joining the UFC, also as a veteran of Invicta and as a veteran of Dana White's Contender Series, though she did not win in her appearance. She was on season 3, got choked out by Sarah Alpar in the second round. Since joining the UFC, she has lost 2. Those were against Macy Chasson and Stephanie Egger, both of those at 135, then dropped to 125 and pounded out Gina Mazzani in the second round. That was at UFC on ESPN, Font versus Vera back in April. So she also is looking for her second straight win. She is not favored to do so by any means. She is one of the bigger underdogs on the card. Right now, Maverick minus 500, Young plus 350 as the underdog. Keith, I'm going to ask you for your pick, your analysis of this fight. I'm going to ask you a simple yes or no question leading into it. Okay. Has Miranda Maverick, has her UFC run disappointed you so far?
No.
Okay. And go.
Okay. I mean, I get what you're saying. Like, she's a super prospect. I like her a lot. And she's only 25, so she's probably just starting to reach her prime years or not there yet. She's got 2 back-to-back losses, you mentioned. I mean, she got absolutely destroyed by Erin Blanchfield, and I thought that would be a much closer fight. But to me, that just Erin Blanchfield is really, really good in just a bad stylistic matchup. And I thought she beat Macy Barber. If she had a win over Macy Barber right now instead of a loss, I don't think you even asked that question.
Yeah.
And most people thought she won that fight. So she's a southpaw. She's got some really high output. She's a good kickboxer. She's very athletic. She's pretty elusive. She has a kind of stick and move style. She likes to dart into range, land shots, and then get out. She has a karate background. She likes that Holly Holm side kick to kind of keep her distance. She attacks with combinations. She's very physically strong. We've seen her. She's got some ripped up arms. She likes to get in the clinch and just batter in close and grind. She looks for elbows. I mean, she busted up Luana Jojua with a nice elbow inside. She's got a good wrestling, good timing on her entries, good top control. I like that she works for like one body part, like the Dagestanis does. She likes to go for like the Dagestani handcuff and kind of control. She beat a good grappler. There's another one, Jillian Robinson. Jillian Robinson is a good fighter. she's a good test for a young fighter. I don't want to say she's a good fighter, but you get what I'm saying. Like that's a tough test, and she won in the areas that she wasn't supposed to, and she won grappling exchanges against Julia Robinson. Though Erin Blanchfield showed that she isn't close to an elite grappler, like Blanchfield showed that. Blanchfield absolutely smoked on the ground, but she showed against Robinson that she could win battles with her grappling. She's got some really good ground and pound, slick back takes. I mean, we saw that in our last fight against Sabina Mazo. She is a submission threat. She has 5 subs, though she will kind of lose position chasing for a submission, which I don't like. And while I thought she beat Macy Barber, the reason why Macy Barber got the win is because Barber came on strong at the end and Maverick kind of gassed out a little bit. I kind of chalked it up to being really young, kind of inexperienced at that time. Shayna Young, who she's going against, I think Shayna Young is underrated. I really do. Most people, I think, would view her as a bottom of the division kind of talent, and I don't view her that way at all. She's not the prospect Maverick is, but she's a tough test. She's got some high output on the feet, kind of Taekwondo style, where little bladed stance, quick hands. She likes her overhand right. She moves straight back on the center line, which I don't like. But she shows that she can kind of eat a shot to land some of her own. Kicks are definitely the best part of her striking game. She likes to push kick, front kick, and she's a solid wrestler. She was an NCAA wrestler. She likes to use her size in the clinch, grind in there, wear her opponent down. She has terrible fight IQ, though. She went against Stephanie Egger, and it's like the one thing you don't do against Stephanie Egger is go in the clinch with her, and she went straight for it multiple times. But when other fighters, she gets in there, knees, elbows inside. She likes upper body takedowns. She will like drop down on the hips and kind of pull her opponent down, which is good. I'd say good entries from the outside, a solid top game, good ground and pound. She's not a submission threat though, and she struggled. If you put her on the back, she really struggled on the bottom. So she should be exploding to get back to feet or look for scramble opportunities. She's more kind of like laying on her back, which I don't like. But she has good cardio. She can go hard. So I think this is a tougher stylistic matchup than the odds suggest. What would you say the odds were?
Maverick is -500. She's the second biggest favorite on the card.
Yeah, I don't think she should be that big. I think that says a lot of how people view Maverick. But I also I don't think it shows. So I'm not trying to dog Maverick at all. I just think it doesn't show how Young is a little bit of a sleeper. I think that's the issue there. I think Young is much better than people think. But I do think there's tiers to MMA, and I think Maverick is on a different tier. Maverick is the overall better athlete. Give me Maverick to land the better shots on the feet. I think she stuffed some of the takedown attempts. She might even get a takedown herself. If she gets on top, that's where Young struggles, and Maverick really excels dropping bombs from on top. So I don't think she gets Young out there, but I say she wins. She wins a decision.
I like that analysis. I've got to say that I'm mildly surprised that Shanna Young has made the transition to flyweight as smoothly as she has. I mean, she's big.
Yeah.
And for the early part of her career, she was fighting huge women. You look at some of the names she fought early in her career, like on the regionals and in Invicta. I mean, she's fought Pam Sorensen. She's fought Jessica Borga, who's like a big 145er. In her first 2 UFC fights, she took on huge Macy Chasson. She took on Stephanie Egger, who's big. Like a good big and has that judoka like just strength.
Yeah.
When Shanna Young is the bigger, stronger fighter, she is capable of bullying somebody. Like when she fought Gina Mazzani, like I think there was a point in the first round where you could almost see it dawn on her. Oh my goodness, I'm the stronger person in this fight for once. And from there, she just mauled Mazzani. And Gina Mazzani is a pretty good fighter. But Shanna Young was a lot stronger. I'm interested to see how this plays out against Maverick because Maverick obviously is a ball of muscle, but she's going to be much shorter than Shanna Young. I'm like, they're listed as 4 inches apart in height. Maybe that's true. I'll be interested to see what the reach disparity is. Maverick has adapted her game really well to being the shorter fighter. You mentioned that she's good at bouncing into range to land punches because that's what she's going to have to do. Like she's shorter than almost everybody at 125. She's got that, Jessica Andrade type build. that's the dynamic I'm most interested in seeing, because Maverick is going to be a lot faster than Young. She's going to be trying to work that game where she's, bouncing in and out, throwing some feints, coming in with kicks and trying to set things up so she can actually land her punches, which I think are kind of her money makers, her damage, shots, and, always looking for kind of her sneaky takedowns. I can't imagine she's going to try to test Shanna Young in the wrestling. It wouldn't make sense for her to do so. I think she'll outstrike her if she stays on the feet. I'm interested to see what happens if and when Young tries to take her down. I hope for Young's own sake that she doesn't just kind of hang out at range and try to kickbox with Maverick, because Maverick is a lot faster and Maverick is very used to fighting people with superior reach. But you pointed out that Young does not always fight to her own best advantage, whereas I think Maverick generally does. And I think this fight, unless Young really commits to the takedown, I think this fight is going to play out at a pace that's not going to test Maverick's gas tank too badly. I see Maverick winning a pretty straightforward decision here. I understand why the line is what it is, but I do agree with you that maybe it's not giving quite enough due credit to Shanna Young and how good she is.
We head now to the men's featherweight division for a matchup between Darrick Minner and Shayilan. Minner, the 32-year-old Nebraskan, is 26-13 overall. He is 2-3 since joining the UFC out of the third season of Dana White's Contender Series. He's a veteran of the third season of Dana White's Contender Series. He actually lost there, got triangled by Herbert Burns, won a couple more fights in the Midwest, and got the call to fight Grant Dawson, I believe on short notice at a catchweight, but got choked out. Came back with 2 straight wins over TJ Laramie and Charles Rosa before running into a wall against Darren Elkins and Ryan Hall. The most recent of those fights, the Hall fight, was almost a year ago. It was back in December of 2021 at UFC 269. Here, 11 months later, he will look to get back on track against Shayilan. The 28-year-old from Inner Mongolia is 38-10 overall. He is 2-1 in the UFC, joined the UFC last May and dropped a unanimous decision to Josh Kulabau in his debut, has come back since then with back-to-back decision wins over Sean Soriano and TJ Brown. The most recent of those, the Brown fight, was the same UFC on ESPN Sarukian versus Gamrot card, where it feels like half these undercard fighters last fought. Odds here, Keith was wondering between segments who the favorite was going to be. Keith, if you know our show at all, does not look at the odds beforehand. I do, and was slightly surprised to see that Shayilan is a 2-1 favorite. He is minus 200, Minner plus 170, and I don't say that because I think Minner's necessarily better. It's that I don't think either of these guys is better. I'm going to toss it to you, Keith, but I do like that Darrick Minner is in the UFC. Like, between him and Steven Peterson, there are 2 guys in the UFC that just look and fight like throwback regional journeymen from like the mid 2000s. Like, they look like guys that would be on Fight Night cards in like 2007. Just like these heavily tattooed Midwestern guys with like 10 or more career losses who are nonetheless just a tough out most of the time.
No, Minner. Yeah, I'm glad Minner. He's one of these guys. He wasn't like this great athlete. He got everything out. He's a bit of a specialist, but what I like about Minner, he's fun to watch, regardless like if he's good or bad. He comes out like he's shot out of a cannon. He has like something like 35 submissions and first round like finishes.
30 are the first round, like 25 of them are guillotines.
Yeah.
Like is he the perfect Glory MMA and fitness fighter?
Yeah, he's fun.
Like the quintessential.
Oh yeah. Like he's like
Like, I'm not saying he's the best, but like the quintessential Glory MMA fighter. Yeah.
On the feet, he reminds me a lot of Merab, and where he has all this like tons of movement, tons of volume, but there isn't much technique there. He isn't really a threat. He's throwing these looping power shots. He throws a lot of kicks, but they aren't the most technically sound kicks. But he has some huge defensive flaws. He stands up tall. He's a huge target, get clocked. He avoids strikes by backing straight up. But all that striking is just to distract you for his eventual entries. Now, he's a former NCAA wrestler. Good doubles, good singles, good at winning scrambles. More of a funk style wrestler where he just wants to create a scramble and see what happens. Kind of. And I said this before, like his teammate, similar to like a Tim Elliott, where he just something happens and he ends up on top. Where he just wants to kind of hold his opponent down. Eventually, from there, well, actually, if he didn't get that, he'll pull a guard. That's the kind of guy he is. He has 22 submission wins. He likes to attack the neck. He likes, Darce chokes and anaconda chokes and that. But he'll also drop down and look for leg lock, heel hooks, knee bars. He submitted TJ Laramie. He out-grappled Charles Rosa. He almost submitted Darren Elkins. So even though Elkins survived and came back, and it was like one of those Darren fucking Elkins moments, just to even put Elkins in those positions was impressive. But when he doesn't get a submission, he guesses bad because he goes so all out for it. And he's not like a rock solid, Gordon Ryan type submission artist. He's got 8 submission losses himself. Now, Shayilan, he isn't a great athlete, and he struggled with the speed of Josh Kulabau, which is such a bad loss. Like, I can't get that one out of my mind. But he's improved since. He's a short and stocky. I mean, he's ripped. Like, the guy's ripped. Yeah. So he's a big dude. He hits hard. I'll give him that. He loves his overhand right. He's a good wrestler. He's relentless to get to the ground, though he will shoot without a setup. But he out-wrestled TJ Brown, which is impressive. That's a good American wrestler. He showed some great hip control to not get taken down himself. He does need to improve his top game. He struggles, to keep the fight on the ground when he gets it there. Like even like TJ Brown was getting up, but he has a submission. He's got a bunch of subs on his record. So I would say the Wolverine is the better prospect. Shayilan. He's the one that if anybody of these two cracks the top 15, I would expect it to be him. I feel the longer this fight lasts, the more confident I feel in him. However, I can't get past it. He has 6 losses out of his 10 that's come by way of submission. Minner will need to sub him early, and I think he finds a way to make it happen. I see some kind of scrambling ensuing, and somehow Minner locks something up. So I guess I'm taking my 4th upset pick. I'm going to say Minner by first round submission.
And I stole your thunder by going first and taking the Ramona Pascual upset, quote unquote. Here, you return the favor because I see all the same stuff you do here. I'm glad that you mentioned that Shayilan, despite how he looks, isn't like a next level top shelf athlete, because the way he's built, like fairly short for the division, but just ripped. Like he's built like Ilya Taporia or Armin Sarukian, but both those dudes are fast twitch athletes, and Shayilan is a little bit plodding, like by featherweight standards. And
he's built like Minowa.
There he is. Just get the man a red Speedo and a mullet, and
massive fan base.
Yeah, and there's that's who can fight Chris Barnett next. It'll be a true Minowa type fight.
Yeah, have him face guys he has no business fighting.
Yeah, Chris Barnett. Yeah, there you go. He's just try to do like a flying heel hook against Chris Barnett while Barnett tries to pick him up by the ankles and just smash him around like a cartoon character.
Yeah, he does. He just does a drop kick. WWF drop kick.
The thing for me is Shayilan has, I think, a bit of prospect feel because he's only been in the UFC fairly recently. He's just 28 years old, but he's going on 50 career fights, and he probably has more than that. He fought enough in China in the mid-teens that he probably has more than 50 fights, and we just haven't gotten them all yet. And I think the prospect thing is over. I think he kind of is what he is at this point. When you look at his record, he's 38-10, and it's not like there are some Chinese fighters in the UFC that they have a surprising number of early career losses, and it's just because they were fighting pro when they were like 16 and fighting people they had no business fighting. But you look at his record, and no, he's just lost to decent fighters all along. He's lost to people like Zhu Rong, who came into the UFC and made a very tiny splash. Just like he has lost to a lot of the decent fighters he's fought all along. And because he's young and because he's Chinese, he's going to get every possible chance from the UFC here. He's on a 2-fight win streak. So again, he's going to be around for a while, but I'm with you. I think if this fight goes into the third round, all the momentum's probably going to favor Shayilan because Minner is going to have blown his gas tank 3 times over. But Minner is so aggressive. He's so opportunistic. I think he has the potential to just do a ton of harm in the first round. Minner's a super aggressive striker. Like you said, he's not super technically sound, but Shayilan is not that defensively sound. Like, Minner could actually hurt Shayilan with just some of his crazy, like, looping punches and stuff out of his weird bouncy stance. And his striking could actually be more than just a means to an end. I think there are almost certainly going to be some extended scrambles in the first round because Minner fights tend to have a lot of those, and that's all Minner. Grabbing Shayilan's neck, either from a front headlock or taking the back in transition, is something he absolutely could do here. And like you, I'm favoring that to be the what we get. Pretty substantial underdog here. And again, if it passes the halfway point of the fight, upset value on Minner goes really, really fast down the tubes. But give me Minner by first round submission here, and it'll be a fun time while it lasts. Next up, we head to the Almeida weight division as Jailton Almeida takes on Maxim Grishin at a 220-pound catchweight. Almeida, the 31-year-old Brazilian, is 17-2 overall. He is 3-0 since joining the UFC out of the 2021 season of Dana White's Contender Series. He debuted this February, knocking out Danilo Marques in the first round. That was at light heavyweight. He came back in May, choked out Parker Porter in the first round. That was at heavyweight. And he fought most recently at UFC 279 on September 10th, where he choked out Anton Turkalj in the first round. That was at a 220-pound catchweight. Since this is Almeida's second straight fight at a contracted weight of 220 pounds, just like Rich Franklin and Rumble Johnson before him, he now has his own weight class. So he's going for 2 in a row at Almeida weight. His opponent, Maxim Grishin, who is just happy to be told in advance he doesn't have to make the 205-pound limit for light heavyweight. The 38-year-old Russian is 32-9-2 overall. He is 2-2 since joining the UFC as a former top-level contender from PFL. He has alternated wins and losses. Debuted with a loss to Marcin Tybura, came back with a win over Gajimurad Antigulov, then lost to Dustin Jacoby, and fought most recently this February at UFC 271, where he won a unanimous decision over William Knight in a fight that had originally been scheduled at 205, but ended up being 218 by the time Knight made it to the scale. So Grishin, once again, fighting at a 220-pound catchweight, but this time he knows about it in advance, can make that extra trip to the buffet. I'm sure he is happy for the news. He is probably not happy for the news that he is a plus 500 underdog. Almeida minus 700 as the biggest favorite on the card, even over Maverick. Keith, Jailton Almeida has said that he wants to be said he wanted to be the Jacare of the light heavyweight division. And now he's being the Jacare of the heavyweight division and the cruiserweight division.
I feel like Israel Adesanya saying like, "Hey, I want to be the John Jones of welterweight." But dude, you don't fight a welterweight.
Yeah. Almeida looks like the real thing. It feels weird to call a 31-year-old guy who's about to be in his 20th career fight a prospect, but this isn't flyweight. This is light heavyweight. Even throwing out Glover Teixeira,
Cruiserweight.
Yeah, cruiser. Yeah.
Super light heavyweight.
Yeah, super. Even throwing out exceptions like Glover Teixeira, the UFC light heavyweight top 10, most of them are between 32 and 38 years old. The UFC heavyweight top 10, even in the middle of this youth movement it's having, it's still full of Derek Lewis and Marcin Tybura types who are, on the backside of their 30s. So as a 31-year-old whose game really does seem to be still improving and developing from fight to fight, I guess he is a prospect. He's a 31-year-old prospect that's going into his 20th fight. He obviously... The Jacare comparison is apt because
Jacare obviously was one of the greatest grapplers of all time, but he was that rarity in that he had explosive athleticism and the willingness to learn, American wrestling style takedowns that really allowed him to impose his grappling on MMA fighters in a way that a lot of other top grapplers haven't been able to. You end up with incredibly decorated grapplers who are forced to pull guard and try to get trips and body locks, where Jacare would just shoot in, scoop a man up, slam him down, knock the wind out of him, and take his neck. That's Almeida. And Almeida, I think, also has shocking power on the feet. Well, I mean, it's not that shocking when you look at him. He looks like he should be able to punch a hole in the side of a building.
Yeah.
But I think he's already become a better technical puncher than Jacare ever was. I'm not saying he's a greater fighter than Jacare. I'm not saying he's better than Jacare are going to be, but I'm pleasantly surprised at how developed his striking is.
Jacare just has this raw power for being such a great athlete.
Yep.
So he would knock guys with his really underrated power.
Yeah, but Almeida actually tries to throw a jab. He tries to punch in combination. Has a couple different. He'll kick to a couple different levels. I understand why he's this kind of favorite over Grishin, because the gap in athleticism is going to be absolutely shocking. It's going to be one of the biggest gaps in athleticism of any UFC fight, not featuring Ed Herman or Roxanne Modafferi in recent history. And all of his best routes to victory just really play into Almeida's strengths really badly. He's a good wrestler who's willing to use his wrestling as an offensive weapon to get the fight to the ground if that's where he feels he wants to fight, or is willing to try to use his wrestling in reverse and win a kickboxing battle. And I just don't think either of those things are going to work on Almeida. If I had a wish for this fight, I mean, I don't root for either fighter. I want a good fight. But if I could submit a wish list for this fight, I'd love to see what Almeida looks like 3 minutes into the second round against a fighter who won't just go away immediately, because he's blown through his UFC opponents with such ease. Nothing has made it past the first round yet. His Contender Series fight made it past the first round, but Nasruddinov isn't a bad fighter. I'm hoping the Grishin will be sturdy enough to withstand the first round onslaught, because we might learn that Almeida gasses out harder than Johnny Walker if you're still standing at the end of the first round. Because this has been a Johnny Walker-esque run in the UFC so far, just blowing through some, they're not world beaters, but, blowing through guys at 3 different weights with ease. Everything he's tried has worked. And it could go off a cliff if he can't withstand adversity, if he doesn't respond well to getting hit by UFC level fighters. Grishin is a solid. I think Grishin's a solid next test for him here. And I think I've said on one of the previous previews that I like Grishin better as a light heavyweight than a heavyweight. I think if there was a 220-pound division, that'd probably be perfect for him. So Almeida's getting the perfect version of Grishin here, but I think Almeida's probably just going to be able to touch him early and often on the feet. I expect that Almeida's punches are going to get through Griffin's slow, his slow guard, his slow footwork, his poor head movement. I think Almeida's going to hurt Grishin early and often on the feet. I think he's going to be able. He might not be able to just take it down at will. If he just starts shooting within 30 seconds, Grishin is a good enough wrestler and physically a strong enough guy that I don't think it's going to be automatic. But I think once Almeida hurts Grishin and has Grishin guessing, he's going to get a takedown pretty easily. And from there, I think he'll be able to advance position, soften him up with elbows, probably just lock up something topside like an arm triangle choke, and put an end to this thing. So give me Almeida by first round submission. But again, my wish list would be that we see him actually tested, because we're getting to the point where the UFC is going to need to tell Almeida to pick a weight class, because we need to find a top 15 opponent for you.
Yeah.
And so, give me a fight that, kind of proves Almeida is ready for contention in one or two of these divisions, and he finally has to pick.
Yeah, dude, just fight at heavyweight.
Because dude, the first time they book him at heavyweight, I mean, dude, what did he weigh for the Parker Porter fight? Let me look at that.
It had to be pretty big. I mean, he's a huge dude. I mean, he
only weighed 224 for the Parker Porter fight.
Okay.
But once he just says I'm going to heavyweight, you know he's going to be like 240 in his next fight.
Yeah,
he's huge.
240. Yeah,
he is huge.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, Grissom's a guy who's kind of bounced back and forth between heavyweight and light heavyweight himself. He's a big guy himself. I mean, he's not going to be small. He's lengthy. He's a kickboxer that I'd say he's more of a technical kickboxer than an explosive guy. He's a bit of a counter striker. He likes to fight at a low output. Like that's the kind of affair he wants. He set up his counters a little bit because he set up his counters with his feints pretty well. I like that. He does really good to slip punches and rip counters. I like that he attacks the body. I like that he throws some teep kicks. A lot of kicks. He likes to kick the upper thighs instead of the calves, so I should kind of change that up. I'd say he's okay power. He's good in the clinch, except when he can be really out-muscled. I think Almeida's so ripped he might be able to out-muscle him, but like Tybora beat him in the clinch, but usually that's like a place where Grishin likes to grind. He gets takedowns with trips and judo throws. He will shoot for a takedown. He showed good takedown defense against a guy like Jordan Johnson, though it did look bad against William Knight. But again, I'm just giving it such a pass for that. Like fighting a guy that was missing weight and all this nonsense. Like, so yeah. As far as Almeida, like you said, who knows what his weight class is, but he could be a heavyweight. Hopefully he gets on the light heavyweight if he wants to make that move. He's got a 79-inch reach, would be really scary at light heavyweight. Very athletic, huge raw power, good kicking game. I love that he kicks the calves, teep kicks. He can throw a high kick, and you mentioned it, for a grappler, he's a good wrestler. He will shoot for takedowns, getting close, like in close, get some takedowns there. He can shoot from distance, some fast entries. You talked about his Nazardinov fight. Like Nazardinov is a good sambo practitioner, and he was winning the clinch battles there. He got some takedowns there. When he hits the fight, he hits the ground. He's a really good BJJ practitioner. Amazing ground game, great top game. I like that in his fights, he's really hasn't rushed things. Even though he's finishing guys quickly, he doesn't rush things. He works like inch by inch before looking for submission, kind of secure the position first. Some great tactics. He has 10 submissions already in his career. I've seen him get submissions off his back, which I do like. He does look for some BJJ off his back, which I mean, is what it is. But I've seen him hit some sweeps, so I like that. On top, I mean, he's mean, crushing ground and pound. I mean, you saw what he did to Danilo Marquez. I'm glad that you mentioned this because I'm also worried. I'm worried about his cardio. He's been to one decision in his career, so that's a little troublesome. So as far as the prediction goes, I think Grishin's a nice step up in the competition. Like you said, mentioned him facing a top 15 guy. Like this is the kind of guy that I think is the right step up. Like this will answer some questions to me. I think Grishin's the more technically sound fighter. But I'm with you, man. I think Almeida special. I think he finds a way to get Grishin down. I wouldn't be surprised if he cracks him either, but I think he gets him down. I think he lands some mean ground and pound, maybe forces Grishin to give up his back, and he locks in a submission. I'll say he does it in the second round.
Next up, the lightweights take the cage as Grant Dawson and Mark O. Madsen lock it up. Dawson, the 28-year-old Nebraskan by way of Florida, is 18-1-1 overall. He is 6-0-1 since joining the UFC out of the first season of Dana White's Contender Series. He won his first 5 right out of the gate before getting a majority draw against Ricky Glenn that we'll probably talk about a little bit more in just a minute here. That was almost exactly a year ago. That was October 23rd, 2021. He has fought just once since then. He fought against Jared Gordon in April at UFC on ESPN, Font versus Vera, getting a submission late in the 3rd round. He'll try to keep his UFC record undefeated against Madsen, who will be trying to keep his overall record undefeated. The 38-year-old former Olympic wrestler from Denmark is a perfect 12-0 in his mixed martial arts career. He is 4-0 since joining the UFC out of a variety of European promotions, primarily Cage Warriors.
He fought most recently at UFC 273 in April, where he took a unanimous decision over Vince Pichel. So, yeah, looking to go 13-0. He is not favored to get it done. Dawson is minus 220, Madsen plus 175. Keith, you follow global MMA closely enough.
Well, I follow NCAA wrestling much more than global, but yeah.
Well, and I was even saying, like, even just global MMA. Was there a point that you were ever really excited about Mark O. Madsen as an MMA prospect, or did he get started too late?
It's too old. Yeah, and I don't follow, again, I don't follow global wrestling as close as I follow NCAA wrestling. That's simply because I like folk style wrestling the best. I think it's the most entertaining. But I do follow the freestyle wrestling. I don't follow Greco as much. One, it's not as entertaining. Two, it's also the type of wrestling that America is the weakest at. America's a very strong freestyle team, extremely strong. A lot of favorites. I mean, Kyle Snyder's and John Bortles just won a world championship, and Kyle Dake, and the list goes on and on and on. And it's only going to get stronger with like a Spencer Lee eventually getting on that scene, and Yanni Diamaka. I always mess up his name, but Yanni, who's unbelievable. And but yeah, I would have been really excited. I like these high level wrestlers, the decorated wrestlers, but coming in, what do you make his UFC debut? And what do you make his MMA debut at? Like what, 34?
I mean, he had a couple like one-off fights before he went and won his medal. He started for real in 2018, and he was already 34.
Yeah, 34 years old. So it's like I kind of felt that way. Like, remember there was a time where there was like, what's his name? The wrestler Kurt Angle was talking about coming over to MMA, and people were like super excited. I'm like, yeah, he's like 35 years old at that time.
Yeah,
like,
35 years old, had already had his vertebrae fused in his neck. Too late, bud.
Yeah, it was like when Alexander Karelin took this one MMA fight. I mean, what do you want to say about it? But
they were trying to make like Karelin versus Rulon Gardner, because Gardner had that one terrible fight too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's another point. Yeah, Rulon Gardner. Yeah, Alexander Karelin might be the greatest wrestler ever.
Yeah,
and I mean, maybe he is the greatest wrestler ever, and he was like 40 years old. Like, I couldn't get excited about it.
Yeah.
And he was still winning Olympic medals at that age, which is crazy.
Yeah.
See, Dawson, on the other hand, Dawson's the guy that he had a little hype coming in, and I think he's been a pretty solid prospect.
Yeah.
So you want me to get into this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right. Yeah, it just, to wrap that up, just as I say, is like, I just wish Madsen came to MMA when he was 24 instead of 34. I'll say this: he has improved a lot on the feet. He can slug it out a bit, and that's because he's an elite athlete who has that wrestling strength in him. So he has some good power. He throws a lot of power shots. He loves that overhand right. He has some defensive flaws. He turtles up to avoid strikes, which I don't like. He had been cracked a little, or I should say a lot. Like, Austin Hubbard hurt him a little bit. Because of his background in wrestling, he's very heavy in that front foot, which opens up for leg wrestling, leg kicks, excuse me. His wrestling obviously is still elite. I mean, he's a silver medalist in the Olympics, but I want to say, I don't know which Olympic one, but it's been a while since he was he's silver medalist in the Olympics. He has some fast entries. He's got really good hip control. I mean, his hips are off the chart, and that's what you're going to get with Greco, especially the Greco-Roman style. Everything's upper body, so it's comes. Your takedowns comes from the hip, using balance and your hips. He can get to an angle really good, and he's so good at loading his opponent on his hips. So when he gets just one little limb, you're going flying. I mean, he showed his strength. We've seen him suplex people in the past. He has some really good inside trips. When it hits the ground, he likes head attacks. We saw him looking for Darce chokes and even like a modified half Nelson before. He still needs to learn the sub game. And overall, he isn't a submission threat. And due to his age, his cardio isn't the best. I mean, we saw him against Austin Hubbard getting really, really tired. Now, Dawson is gaining confidence in his hands. I mean, he still stands a little too tall for my liking. but he's no longer throwing arm punches, which was kind of thing. He's starting to really set his feet, generate some power. And it makes a lot of sense considering he's a big guy for the weight class. He still gets hit a little too much for my liking, but he's looked much faster. His confidence is starting to grow. He does overreact a little when he gets hit. Like I've seen him get hit and kind of like spin and doesn't really look good to the judges. But his offensive tools are still some there. Like I like his step in knees. I like his kicking game. Kicks to the body is a really good tool. I don't know if he's going to use that a lot against Marco Madsen, being that I guess he teep kicks a little bit, but maybe I see him staying away from kicks altogether because don't want to give him the chance to grab a leg. Maybe calf kicks, which is actually one of the best strikes for Dawson too. Go back to the fight against Nad Navarani. He destroyed Nad Navarani with calf kicks. He's a good wrestler, good timing on his entries, good hip control himself. He might even be a better grappler though. Smothering top game. I like that he advances his position on the ground and some really, really slick back takes. So as far as prediction goes, man, like, I hate to do this. I hate to go against credentialed wrestlers. It's like, MMA is my favorite sport. Wrestling is my second favorite sport.
And just a real quick, since got the producer hat on, Marco Madsen's Olympic silver medal was in 2016, but
that's actually way more recent than I thought.
No, but that was a comeback. Like he was already well into his 30s. Like all of his medals in the World Championships have been in like 2006, 2007. He actually went and had 2 MMA fights, decided to give wrestling one more try, and it was almost like this Chris Campbell type thing where he came out of nowhere in his he wasn't 38 like Campbell was, but came almost out of nowhere in his 30s and won a medal that really validated his amateur wrestling career. So
good for him. Yeah, good for him. So
I call myself the Olympian. I call myself the Olympian too. Shit.
Yeah, I take back what I said about him. Like I'm glad he didn't come to MMA, like, because he was going to be more successful in wrestling anyway. So good for him. I was thinking like 2000, like 4 Olympics or something like that. That's what I was thinking. But man,
and that would have been in line because, like, again, he medaled 5 times in the World Championships, and they were all between like 2005 and 2010, 2011. So yeah. I'm not like I said, I don't follow the Greco-Roman as much as I follow freestyle wrestling. But yeah, it's always boring. It is. It really is. It's more boring of the two. I don't trust his durability. I don't trust his gas tank. Dawson, he's going to have to go against his own instinct. He's going to have to avoid wrestling, especially early. Maybe later on he can turn, but like first round, second round, like don't let Madsen bank rounds and then have to try to play catch up. I could see Dawson maybe even getting a takedown or two because, as Madsen fades or Maxim, throwing an overhand shot. And honestly, sometimes these Olympic wrestlers or these high-level wrestlers, they kind of like shit on guys who don't have that credential wrestling. They kind of like, oh, this guy would never take me down, But I just see Dawson landing some hard shots. I think he can damage him with the calf kicks. And I could even see a late stoppage, and that's what I'm going to say happens. I say Dawson hurts him. I think Dawson... I think we have some pretty good first round, maybe even a second round, but I think Dawson takes over in the third. I think he lands a big shot. I think he follows up with strikes. I'm gonna take Dawson by third round TKO. Awesome. I have to throw out like one little historical note here, just because we've been kind of talking about things relevant to it, and I feel bad saying this about the guy because you and I both love him as a wrestler and as a fighter and think he's a great interview. But one of the biggest self-owns in UFC pre-fight hype history has to be when Phil Davis was going to fight Rashad Evans. And he said, the thing about Rashad and me is that we're both supposed to have elite wrestling, but only one of us really does.
Yeah.
Because of course, Phil was a national champ, and Rashad was like the guy who was like 24-10 as a senior at Michigan State.
Like probably qualified his senior year, but wasn't. From one and done kind of thing.
I mean, kind of like John Fitch. Well, I wrestled at a Big Ten school, but I wasn't like an All-American or anything. And then Rashad just washed him, like in the wrestling.
You see it a lot in like junior college guys or D2 guys getting takedowns on the D1. The D1 guys like just kind of shitting on him, like, I'm D1. It's different. Just the stance alone. It's not wrestling. You know, they have a straight wrestling match. Phil Davis would have watched him.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And take away, you're completely eliminating referee's position. Because you're not seeing cheap tilts. You're not seeing leg riding. You're not seeing, crab rides and all this. Like, I remember when George St. Pierre got takedowns on Josh Koscheck, and I was like, oh, my God, man, George St. Pierre probably would have been national. Like, no. If they had a straight wrestling match where Koscheck is in a wrestling stance, and he's collar tying up, he's hand fighting, like, Josh Koscheck would have warmed him.
Yeah. Well, like, where somebody's not, like, busting my orbital with his jab.
Yeah, much different. Yeah.
Very different. But anyway, like that was a rough time for Phil, but normally the man is an absolute delight.
He's the man.
Here, I mean, spoiler alert. I'm with you. I'm going with Dawson here. He's younger. He's much faster and more athletic at this point, but it does stay interesting if this thing goes into the third round, as I'm almost certain it's going to go to the third round and probably go to decision. Dawson, like, neither of these guys is super reliable in the third round, and that feels weird to say, but Dawson's draw against Rick Glenn, most of the draw part of it is because Dawson put a 10-8 round on him in the first round, and Glenn arguably put a 10-8 round on Dawson in the third, and it looked bad because Glenn was all of a sudden like pancaking his takedowns and busting him up on the feet, and that's how we ended up with that weird majority draw. It feels weird to say, considering that Dawson has third round finishes in 2 of his last 3 fights, but before he choked out Gordon, that was also the round where Gordon was putting the most offense on Dawson. Like, Dawson is good in the third round. It's not like he's just gassed and dead on his feet, but he becomes more vulnerable if his opponent has anything left to offer. That's the question with Madsen. I don't know what would have happened if Madsen pivoted to MMA permanently in the early 2010s instead of giving one more try to the Olympics. My gut says he just would have been the same pretty good guy for much longer. Like, he'd be a 25 fight veteran that had kind of bounced around between Cage Warriors, UFC, and Bellator, but probably wouldn't have been a top guy even then. Madsen is a big dude for 155. I'll say that. I mean, a lot of his fights in Europe were at 170. You see him in the UFC, and he's got that Marvin Eastman thing where his lats are so big, it's almost like he's got a turtle shell on his back or like beetle wings, and he could just like flap and fly off. I mean, honestly, he looks a little bit like a miniature Karelin, because Karelin always had like those traps and those lats that just like, oh my goodness. We should just have a show about Alexander Karelin and how dope it would have been if there'd been MMA and like.
I'll go to my grave saying this. Who's the greatest athlete ever? Well, give me like Jim Thorpe. He played like accelerated in a million sports. Who's the greatest American team sports? I don't give a shit what anybody says. I don't give a shit anybody says. If you don't see Tom Brady, you're an idiot. Don't give me Michael Jordan any of the shit. If you don't see Tom Brady, you're an idiot. He literally had Michael Jordan's career twice. But the most dominant in one sport at their sport is Alexander Karelin.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, even if you want to say, oh, it's apples and oranges, you can't compare freestyle to folk style to, like, that he is the greatest Greco-Roman wrestler of all time by such a wide gap, over the second greatest.
He's the most dominant, and I believe he's the most dominant in his sport than anybody is in any sport. I'm sure somebody would come at me with this guy in ping pong was 900-0.
Yeah.
Okay. Alexander Karelin's the world's record was 882-2. I might be off by that. It was 800 and something and 2.
Yeah.
And in the last one, he was in the gold medal match against Roland Gardner, and he had a technicality fall for breaking a grip, a new rule at the time.
Yep.
And then
he was.
Yeah. Anyways, good.
He was something. Anyway, I don't know why I feel the need to interject that into the Dawson versus Madsen thing, but Dawson is vulnerable late, but I don't think Madsen's the guy to take advantage of it because Madsen's gas tank has been questionable as well. And I think in either event, by the time we get to the third round, Dawson will probably have 2 rounds comfortably banked away. Give me Dawson by decision here, possibly winning all 3 rounds. But considering that, he's shown a lot of fire on the feet as well as on the ground in the 3rd round of his fights, maybe we get a late finish, but that's not my pick. Give me Dawson by decision here. Next up on the UFC Vegas 64 main card is a men's flyweight matchup between Tagir Ulanbekov and Nate Maness. Ulanbekov, the 31-year-old Dagestani, is 13-2 overall. He's 2-1 in the UFC. Came to the UFC, won 2 fights right away over Bruno Silva and Alan Nascimento before running into Tim Elliott at UFC 272 this March and dropping a unanimous decision. He will look to get back to his winning ways against Maness. The 31-year-old Kentucky native is 14-2 overall. He is 3-1 in the UFC. He also dropped his most recent outing. He came to the UFC, won 3 straight over Johnny Munoz Jr., Luke Sanders, and Tony Gravely before running into Umar Nurmagomedov at UFC on ESPN, Sarukian versus Gamrot in June, where he lost a unanimous decision to the super prospect. Ulanbekov is a moderate favorite here. He is minus 175, Maness plus 145 as the underdog. Keith, 125 is, for a division that was on death watch 3 years ago, it's certainly incredibly healthy right now. It's becoming like 135, 45, 55, 70, a division where the gap between prospect and contender is super wide just because the pool of contenders is big enough that you have to do a lot to really get on radar. Do you see that kind of upside in either of these guys? And who do you think wins this one?
Yeah, I definitely do. Maness, I'm surprised he's even coming down to the weight class because he was always a really big, like 135 pounder.
I should have mentioned all 4 of his fights in the UFC so far have been at 135, and so were most of his fights on the regional level. So he's dropping to 125 for the first time. Yeah,
and he wasn't a small 135 pounder. He was big. Like if you told me Nate Maness was changing weight, I would have thought he would go up, like not down. But Maness, he's a high volume striker. He's tough as nails. He's one of these guys like willing to eat a shot to land one of his own, kind of like a modern day Leonard Garcia type. He's very hittable. He lacks head movement, but he counts on his breaking his opponent's will. He had great power at 135. I don't know how that's going to translate at 125 being, have to cut a little bit more. He does struggle if he's the one getting bullied back. He also doesn't check leg kicks. Luke Sanders had a lot of success against him. He will wrestle. He's more of a grappler than a wrestler, though. He's got some slick back takes. He's got 3 submission wins in his career, and he was one of these guys that cardio was a weapon. Again, I'm a little concerned considering it's now down at 125. Now, Ulanbekov is, even though Maness is going down, you think he's a bigger guy. Ulanbekov is a long and lengthy guy himself. He's a pressure fighter with really good volume. He's technically sound. He uses a lot of feints, nice stiff jab, pretty accurate. He throws a lot of straight shots down the pipe, attacks with combos. He's pretty elusive, moves really well. He does good at cutting angles when he's attacking. I'd say good power, though he does stand up a little tall, which is if he kind of sat in his punch, he's generating more. But he stands up a little tall and makes himself a pretty big target. He keeps his chin high in the air. Hard calf kicks, though he doesn't check leg kicks himself. You go back to the Bruno Silva fight. Bruno Silva had some success kicking out Ulanbekov. But what I like about Ulanbekov in that fight was he hurt his legs, and he still showed mental toughness to dig deep and win that fight. Now, he's a good wrestler, though I actually think it might be a little overrated. I shouldn't say that. His takedowns are good, but his control isn't. He can get takedowns from the inside with body locks. He also can shoot through the hips. He's shown some great takedown defense. And if he's taken down, he pops up pretty good. But his control, he kept taking down Tim Elliott. Tim Elliott kept popping back up, creating a scramble. And Ulanbekov was really having a hard time kind of following him. He does have 6 career submissions. And despite losing to Tim Elliott, he showed really good cardio. Like he to be able to match the output of Tim Elliott's impressive. He did it against Bruno Silva. He did it against Alan Nascimento. So as far as prediction goes, I really think Maness is a tough test. Like he's a tough test for anybody. He's a gamer. I just don't know. I don't even know if he makes 125. I mean, he's always come off as a real professional, so he probably, I'm sure he's done test cuts and all that. I just wanted to just, I did not expect to be at 125. I'm a little worried about his gas tank there, being a guy known for his his gas tank. I think Ulanbekov is going to work him with takedowns. I think Maness might even start to gas, and it's deeper the fight goes, the easier and easier it becomes for Ulanbekov as the fight moves on. If Bekov went up to 135, I actually might take Maness, but being the Maness is moving down, I'm going to take Bekov by decision.
Yeah, I see the same dynamic here that you do. Ulanbekov's, even his loss to Tim Elliott was impressive because, as you mentioned, he took Elliott down repeatedly, had a real hard time keeping him down, but everyone has a real hard time keeping Elliott down. Like, being kind of squirmy and slippery and funky is a lot of what his game runs off of. I mean, hell, Demetrius Johnson couldn't hold the guy down. But what impressed me was, like you said, he came on strong in the third round. That was the only round I gave to Ulanbekov against Elliott, and it looks like the judges did the same, because the kind of rinse and repeat scramble heavy fight they had is incredibly exhausting. Like, very good MMA wrestlers have just gassed out and wilted after 2 rounds plus of taking down a guy that will not stay down. And Ulanbekov had more left than Elliott in that last round. That spells good things for me against Maness, because like you, if this fight were taking place at 135, well, 1, I think the line might be a pick'em, and 2, I'd feel more comfortable with Maness, because yeah, it is shocking that he's moving down in weight. The Fight Finder has them listed as 4 inches apart in height. I'll be surprised if that actually ends up being the case when they get in the cage. I have the feeling that Ulanbekov might be a little shorter than Maness, but not much. But yeah, Maness is a big guy at 135, so it'll be interesting to see if he makes it, and if he does, how he looks. And even if the cut goes perfectly and he makes 126 on the dot, you have to imagine his gas tank won't be what it could be. Like if this fight were taking place at a more comfortable weight for him. That all spells good things for Ulanbekov if this thing makes it to the third round. And it seems to me pretty likely that it will. I expect that Maness will probably win one of the first 2 rounds. Like, his sheer size is going to present problems for Ulanbekov. I think he, will have good success in the striking, as well as, possibly be able to take the guy down. But I think Ulanbekov will probably start to take over as this fight goes along, and I'm thinking he wins this thing going away, maybe by winning the second and third rounds. Give me Ulanbekov by decision, and I guess it will just remain to be seen whether the Nate Maness experiment at 125 continues afterward. Next up at UFC Fight Night 214 is the lone official heavyweight fight on the card, leaving aside the one Almeida weight fight, as Chase Sherman and Josh Parisian meet. As I mentioned during the intro, the real shock is not that this fight is on the main card, or even that both these guys are still in the UFC, but they're both coming off of wins. How about that? Sherman, the 32-year-old Mississippi native, is 16-10 overall. He is 4-9 in the UFC across multiple stints with the promotion. He is 2-4 this time around, and like I said, is coming off a win. He came into his fight against Jared Vanderaa back in July on the back of 4 straight losses. To be fair to him, they were against Andrei Arlovsky, Parker Porter, Jake Collier, and Alexander Romanov. So actually arguably getting more difficult as he went along. I don't know what they were doing to the guy, but he knocked out Vanderaa in the third round under an accumulation of punches. He will look to make it 2 straight against Parisian. The 33-year-old Michigan native, 15-5 overall, 2-2 since joining the UFC out of the 2020 season of Dana White's Contender Series. He has alternated wins and losses. Lost to Parker Porter, defeated Roque Martinez, lost to Dontel Mays, and most recently on, again, that same Sarukian versus Gamrot card, beat Alan Baudot by second round TKO. Odds here, dead pick'em as of the beginning of fight week. Both men out there around -110 or -115. So take your pick, make your bet. Don't bet on heavyweight MMA. But, Keith, it's a constant race to the bottom. There's always a pool of guys that are on the cusp of being the worst heavyweight still in the UFC. Last week on the solo preview, I argued that it was Jared Vanderaa, who
it might be.
Dude, you lose to Chase Sherman, and
you got the title.
That's what you get. Problem there was Chase Sherman is kind of the same fighter he's always been. I've said this a bunch of times. He looks like a really good heavyweight should look. Like he's a huge guy who's not fat.
Looks like Tarzan, fights like Jane.
Yeah, and it has never translated into, to coin a phrase that I say often, to a guy that does really anything at a UFC level. But, at his best, Sherman is kind of a pretty high output, low power striker. And just the problem is Vanderaa is so susceptible to his opponent's offense that even Chase Sherman was able to finally pile up enough damage that he put him away late.
This is a nice way to say it. Instead of just saying Vanderaa sucks.
It just seems like such a delightful dude. But yeah, he's
a good regional fighter.
He's a good regional fighter, and now that
would still make him tougher than 99% of the people out there.
Absolutely, yeah. And just there aren't many really good heavyweights in the world, and now that Harry Hunsucker has dropped to 205, it probably is Vanderaa. Hunsucker was the gold standard, but he decided to be 2-division worst fighter in the UFC. So
someone go find John Vellante somewhere.
Yeah. I guess Harry Hunsucker is kind of becoming trying to be the anti-Daniel Cormier, where Cormier was trying to be the best light heavyweight and heavyweight in the world at the same time. Yeah. Man, neither of these guys has a win over a UFC level heavyweight. Sherman's 2 UFC wins are Ike Villanueva, which, all apologies to my guy Ike, just hasn't, too little, too late. It's a fun thing that he made it, but and then Jared Vanderaa, who I expect will be released this week, and then Josh Parisian has beaten Roque Martinez, gone. Alan Baudot. If Baudot isn't gone, it's just because they're holding him in reserve for one last Europe card before they let him go, because Baudot has been terrible. Having said that, and even though Sherman is, again, coming off the best win of his UFC run, I do think Parisian has more upside. They're both big guys, but Parisian seems physically stronger. The other thing about Sherman is, even though he looks like a freaking tank, just, he gets bullied in the clinch. Parisian seems physically stronger, just kind of seems meaner and more aggressive. Yeah. He doesn't throw as much volume as Sherman. And okay, one thing I'll give Sherman, very, very few UFC very, very few MMA heavyweights, period, bother to throw a jab, bother to throw in combination, just because most of them can knock each other out with one big punch. Sherman, throws in combination more often than Parisian, but Parisian does have much, much better one-shot power. Neither of these guys is super high level, but one's going to live to fight another day. And I'm going to say it's Parisian. We get a wild, sloppy slobber knocker in the first round. Sherman is inspired by his newfound knockout power and decides to get reckless and gets plunked in the second. Give me Josh Parisian by round 2 TKO.
Yeah. Do you think Chase Sherman can do a pull-up? One single pull-up?
I bet he can. I bet he can do a pull-up just fine. I bet if you put him through the NFL Combine, he does better than most UFC heavyweights. He's fine on the box drill and the cones.
Yeah, okay. You think Josh Parisian has ever tried to do a pull-up?
I think Josh Parisian could probably do a pull-up.
Fuck that.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, this fight's terrible. It's one of those, like, when I start have to look at, like, I didn't do any tape study. Like, you have 13 fights. There's only so many you can do. I didn't do any tape study. Like, you guys know that I'm not doing tape study on Chase Sherman and Josh Parisian. You mentioned about Sherman, how he looks like he'd be good. He's a boxer. He uses feints well. He does well to keep everything inside. Hardly ever overextends himself. His left hook is his best strike. He also, if you get inside, he can throw some elbows. He busted up Ike Villanueva with it. He's got some high volume. I like that. He's one of these guys who actually gets better as the fight moves along. But he, as you mentioned, he's a point fighter in a weight class where guys need to have power. I mean, he lacks power. He's got good calf kicks, but he's really easy to hit. He stands too tall. He stands right in front of his opponent. No lateral movement. Doesn't have a ground game. He's been taken down a bunch of times in the past. He's been submitted a few times. Looks really bad on the ground. Parisian, he's a very lumbering guy. Hand speed just doesn't exist for this guy. He does throw a jab. He has some high volume. He loves spinning attacks, but he stands up really tall. He pulls his head straight back. You got to stop worrying about his chin. I mean, Alan Badeau cracked him. He won that fight, but Badeau dropped him. He's not a good wrestler. He's been out-wrestled by Parker Porter and Dontel Mays. Dontel Mays passed the guard on him. So if he ends up on top, though, he's so big, he can just pin his opponent down like he did against Badeau. But he gassed out bad against Parker Porter, and he was gassing out against Badeau in that fight. So as far as prediction goes, both guys aren't good. Both guys are pretty bad on the ground. Parisian bigger, and I would say he is meaner, and he could probably win a grimy bet, like fight. I would say Sherman probably has the better gas tank. I didn't want to take either guy. You're taking Parisian, so screw it. I'll take Sherman. I'm going to say Sherman wins the ugliest fight in history. Jabs and I don't know. Give me Sherman by decision.
Oh, Keith, wishing that on us.
Split decision. Fight of the night.
Oh, better yet. Let it be a real bad robbery so neither guy gets cut.
Split decision where nobody cares except for that guy who bid on one of them. They're all pissed off on Twitter like, oh, these judges don't know how to score.
Yeah. Like, I'm assuming that 75% of people that get into a losing fighter's DMs is people that lost money. Like,
Yeah.
otherwise, like, what kind of shitty human being are you? That you would... Yeah. The co-main event of UFC Vegas 64 is a welterweight matchup between Neil Magny and Daniel Rodriguez. Magny, the 35-year-old American, Haitian American, the Haitian sensation, 26-9 overall, 19-8 since joining the UFC out of season 16 of The Ultimate Fighter. He lost his last time out. Volunteered to be the test for super prospect Shavkat Rakhmonov, ended up getting choked out in the closing seconds of round 2. That put the skids on a 2-fight win streak for him against Jeff Neal and Max Griffin. He will look to get back on track against Rodriguez. The 35-year-old Californian is 17-2 overall. He is 7-1 since joining the UFC as a veteran of Season 3 of Dana White's Contender Series, though he was not signed immediately after his appearance. He won, went back, won one more fight, I believe, in Southern California, then got signed to the UFC. Since then, 7-1, 3 wins, a loss to Nicholas Dalby, and now 4 more straight wins over Mike Perry, Preston Parsons, Kevin Lee, and Li Jingliang. The most recent of those, the Lee win, was at UFC 279 in September. So he's going to look to make it 5 straight, which even in the welterweight division really does get you on the radar. He is not quite favored to do so, but the odds are super close right now and might well shift during fight week. As of the beginning of fight week, Magny is out there minus 120, Rodriguez minus 105. Keith, it's hard not to be a Neil Magny fan. I mean, whatever you like in a fighter, Neil Magny probably brings it for you. Like, for a guy that doesn't get a whole lot of finishes, he has consistently entertaining fights. You know, normally when you think of the most exciting fighters, it's guys that
knock everybody out or submit everybody. Magny gets a lot of decisions, but his fights are usually a lot of fun. He was such an anyone, anytime, anywhere fighter coming out of Tough. Became famous, I think, as the first UFC fighter to fight 5 times in a calendar year after the tournament era. Don't leave us alone, old school people. We know. Yeah. And even now, where if he's not on his way down, he's at least plateaued and making the best of his remaining time. He's become a guy who is still anyone, anywhere, anytime, but instead of fighting 5 times a year, it translates to taking fights against people that nobody else wants to fight. Like just taking high-risk, low-reward fights. Taking on Shavkat Rakhmonov was absolutely that. Taking on Michael Chiesa, where Chiesa was just jumping over from lightweight to welterweight. It was the test case to see if he was going to immediately slot in as a top 10 fighter, just moving over from one division to another. Magny puts his hand up. Like, he's that guy. And I think Rodriguez is another high-risk, relatively low-reward fight for him, because Rodriguez is... he might be ranked behind him in the UFC's rankings, even though he's on a 4-fight win streak, and he's probably the hottest fringe contender in the division right now. Tell me what you think of this fight. Tell me who you think wins.
Yeah, this fight is dope. You can make an argument for it being the main event. It seemed like Daniel Rodriguez just fought though, and it seems like Magny fights every other weekend, so maybe that's not why. It might be why it's not the main event. Just a really fun matchup, really hard fight to pick because I like both guys a lot. Magny is, as you mentioned, is the ultimate volume fighter. He's a fighter who, when we say cardio is a tool, cardio is their best weapon. That is Neil Magny all the way. He's one of these guys who'll start off at a normal pace, but by the third round, it's like he's full sprinting. He's a long and lengthy fighter that he wants to fight all the way in or all the way out. From range, he works behind a popping jab, not loading up on anything, just kind of touching, no tells. A lot of teep kicks, a lot of calf kicks. I always go back to that Rocco Martin, which was such an impressive performance with his calf kicks. Just took out Martin with those calf kicks. When he crashes inside, he does really well to use his height and his size to wear on his opponent, get inside, get in that clinch, dirty it up. I love his stepping knees. I like his knees inside the clinch. I like his close quarter striking, elbows. I think he's an underrated offensive wrestler. He gets a lot of takedowns, especially because he uses those takedowns as the, part B of A being, I'm going to press you back to the fence. Now you can't sprawl. Or I'm in close and I have these long arms. I can just drop down on something. He has struggled, though, when you put him, on the defense, taking him down. I go back to the Michael Chiesa fight, going way back to the RDA fight. Now, Daniel Rodriguez, he's a big welterweight, but he's more thick. He's just a thick guy. Mm-hmm. He's not ripped. He's just big.
Yeah.
He's a southpaw that is pretty aggressive on the feet. He's one of the best boxers in the division. Fast hands. The jab is the cornerstone of his game. Everything comes off his jab. He can win with just the jab. Look at his last fight against Li Jingliang was just jabbing. Though his straight left is a pretty clean punch, and I like his check hooks too, because he doesn't just try to time you coming in. He cracks hard. Tim Means got cracked with it. He put up Preston Parson with it, busting him up really good. He has some, I wouldn't say serious power, but he's one of the harder hitters in the division. He has a really good chin though. He's been hits with big shots, and he just keeps moving forward. He doesn't really seem phased. He's also an underrated grappler himself. I wouldn't say wrestling is his forte, but he'll sneak one in every once in a while to kind of win a round. He's very hard to take down. He does have 3 submission records, and he did catch Tim Means in a submission, which is always good. I think this is an amazing fight. I've flip-flopped back and forth twice, but I'm going to go with Magny. Rodriguez looked a little flat in his last fight, and especially early. And if he doesn't get off to a good start, Magny's not the guy you want to give rounds away to because he gets better as the fight goes on. So you're going to have to come out fast again and almost you want to get ahead against Neil Magny. So I just say Magny outworks him. I think he might get past that jabbing range, might get inside, might kind of battle in the clinch a little bit. Give me Magny, but I think it's going to be a really close contested fight. Give me Magny by decision. I'll say split decision.
Man, I understand exactly why you're putting down everything you are here, and completely agree with your assessment of their relative skill sets. And I know that it should be concerning that Rodriguez fought just like 6 weeks ago. I'm inclined to attribute his somewhat flat performance back at UFC 279 to the last minute shuffle that took place, where he was the most hosed guy of the 6 people involved. He ended up getting moved down the card to take an opponent of less name value.
Hold on. You think Rodriguez got hosed the most?
Well,
no, Li Jingliang got hosed the most.
Okay.
You want to say second? Sure.
Okay. Collectively, they got hosed the most.
Okay.
Lee first. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Rodriguez second because Lee got a much harder fight than he was scheduled for.
And out of 10 pounds higher than he weighed in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, a lot of that flatness might just be the last minute change. All of a sudden, you're in in against an opponent you haven't trained for, was pulled out of a hat, is stylistically very different from what you were expecting. It does concern me that, he's going to fight at 170, 6 weeks after fighting at 180. And I'm talking myself out of picking Rodriguez as we go right now because, like, as you mentioned, Neil Magny is not the guy you want to have to deal with if you absolutely positively must win that third round, because he's going to be fresh as a daisy and just getting mean. But stylistically, I do favor Rodriguez here. And my expectation would be that if one of these guys wants to bring this to the ground, it's more likely to be Rodriguez than Magny. But it's possible that we get a fight that takes place almost entirely on the feet. I like Rodriguez's hand speed and his boxing here. For the most part, the people that have beaten Magny at the UFC level, well, for one, I mean, they've all probably just been better fighters, and they've been better fighters who can do one thing much, much better than Magny, who is very much a jack of all trades, but Lorenz Larkin isn't a better fighter than Neil Magny, and he just beat him with hand speed. And that, that's the one outlier. The rest of the people who've beaten them are all ranged from top 10 to top 5 to like former champs, basically. I think Rodriguez is probably going to have surprisingly good success on the feet against Magny. My thought, and if I'm hoping my pick ends up being right, my hope is that Rodriguez has 2 rounds socked away by the third. So, either holds on or, just keeps rolling. Give me Rodriguez by decision, but it is one of the picks I am least confident in on this card for all the reasons you mentioned. Like, just picking a short notice, well, not a short notice, but a short turnaround opponent against Neil Magny. Like, I should know better than this, and I'll probably be just like burying my face in my hands on the recap. But there it is for now. Give me Rodriguez by decision. With that, we come to the main event of UFC Fight Night 214, a strawweight contenders fight between Marina Rodriguez and Amanda Lemos. Rodriguez, the 35-year-old Brazilian, is 16-1-2 overall. She is 6-1-2 since joining the UFC out of the first season of Dana White's Contender Series Brazil. She is currently on a 4-fight win streak since her only career loss, a split decision against Carla Esparza back in July of 2020. Since then, she has beaten Amanda Ribas, Michelle Waterson-Gomez, Mackenzie Dern, and Yan Xiaonan. The most recent of those, the Yan win, was at UFC 272 in March. She will look to make it 5 in a row and possibly certify herself a title challenger in her next fight by getting past Lemos. The 35-year-old Brazilian is 12-2-1 overall. She is 6-2 since joining the UFC as a former Jungle Fight bantamweight champ. Worth noting that while she's 6-2 in the UFC, she is 6-1 at strawweight. She debuted at bantamweight, took on Leslie Smith, lost, dropped 2 full weight classes, and ever since, again, she is 6-1. That one loss was a 3-minute thrashing by Jessica Andrade in the headliner of UFC Fight Night 205 in April. That put a stop to a 5-fight win streak, but she kicked things right back into gear in July by guillotining Waterson Gomez in the second round at UFC on ABC, Ortega versus Rodriguez. Rodriguez is a comfortable favorite here. She is minus 210, Lemos plus 170. Keith, it's a little surprising that both these women are 35.
Yeah.
You know, it's not an exact one-to-one comparison, but I think of women's strawweight as being kind of like men's welterweight in terms of how much speed matters, how well fighters tend to age into their 30s. You know, and I think of 35 as kind of the tail end of the prime for both weight classes. And it's not that either of these women are late starters or late bloomers. Like, they've been highly regarded fighters right out of the gate since they came to the UFC. For the most part, they've delivered on that promise. I mean, again, this is a possible title eliminator, but I talked during the intro about how either of these women might be the one to break the shell around the UFC strawweight crown. They don't have a whole lot of time to do it. I mean, those 5 women that we mentioned, several of them are younger than Rodriguez and Lemos. I love watching Rodriguez fight. I think she's one of the most enjoyable kind of Muay Thai style kickboxers in the UFC in any weight division, either gender. Like, she's a blast to watch, and she does the things that, you know, as a fan first coming into the sport, and still even now as a media member, I always hope for when a striker crosses over to MMA. Like, I just hope they learn to make their game work at the, you know, against MMA fighters. Like, they have the footwork, or they just figure out ways to keep fighters from crowding their kicks. That they develop enough takedown defense. You know, like, she's done that. Even her UFC loss to Carla Esparza, one of the very best wrestlers in the division, you know, it was a close fight. She did well, like, not to just camp out on her back and like lose rounds that way.
And obviously it aged well too.
Yeah, that's aged super well, because since then Esparza's won the title back against Mackenzie Dern. Just, you know, specialist versus specialist. More of the fight took place in Rodriguez's wheelhouse than Dern, and she won uncontroversially. Against Yan Xiaonan, she beat, think kind of a lesser version of herself, a tall, rangy striker, and just Rodriguez was the better tall, rangy striker. Lemos, she's super aggressive. She hits like a ton of bricks. But to win this fight, like, she's going to need to be the one coming forward, and she's going to need to land something big on Rodriguez, and just not many people have done that. Lemos' first instinct is not usually to wrestle. She'd rather, you know, slug it out.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to see if she tries to mix some of that in just to maybe get Rodriguez to drop her hands, get her thinking, make her stop kicking so much. I think that's what a lot of this kind of hinges on. Because if Lemos gets like an emphatic takedown, like catches a kick and like dumps Rodriguez and wins the first round just by mauling her from top position for 3 minutes, that's going to change the complexion of the second and third rounds. If Lemos is just charging forward and Rodriguez is just giving ground and pot shotting her and, you know, sliding out to the left and to the right, making her miss, this is going to be a washing. You know, like, Rodriguez will probably just win all 5 rounds and Lemos will look busted up at the end. I'm going to credit Lemos with being smarter than that and fighting to her best advantage here, and at least feinting some level changes to try to keep Rodriguez honest. But yeah, this to me is a much niftier, more defensively sound striker against a woman whose primary routes to victory all involve her power and athleticism and aggression. And Rodriguez has handled those type of women just fine so far. So give me Rodriguez by a pretty one-sided decision here. Wow. And one that, again, as the one on the longer winning streak, probably positions her as a title challenger sometime early next year.
Yeah, I'll say this. I think this is a great fight. I really do. I think it's one of the most intriguing ones in the division. Yeah, the age of them, it could fall off at any time in pace that they're both being 35. But if they're as good as we saw them, I think we're in for a really, really fun fight. You mentioned Rodriguez. Rodriguez is really big for the weight class. She's long and lengthy. She's a good athlete. She's one of the best strikers in the division. High volume, pressure striking. She attacks with combos, probably one of the hardest hitters in the division. Some great kicks. I love her step-in knees. I like that she gets to the clinch. She really uses her size in there. She likes to frame, lands small shots, kind of has a mean streak in there, some mean knees inside. Her defensive wrestling has come a long way. I mean, she was taken down by Cynthia Calvillo. She was taken down, as you mentioned, by Carlos Esparza. Even her last fight, Yan Shannon, she was taken down twice. But she showed improvements, though, against Mackenzie Dern, against Michelle Waterson. Like, neither one of them could get her down. When Mackenzie Dern did get her down, she showed some really good submission defense. She didn't get subbed by the best grappler in the division. Though she isn't a submission threat herself at all. Like, that's not her game. Like, if she gets a takedown, she wants to pay on top and just kind of win the round. Lemos is also a great athlete. She's very fast, very explosive, one of the best jabs in the women's division. It's a bit of an up jab because she kind of drops her hand, so she kind of has to throw upward. She uses feints really well to set up her counter strike. She likes to counter strike. When she gets in the pocket, she throws hard, tight hooks. She has good power. She generates a lot of power because she kind of keeps her base underneath her. She has beautiful kicks. Calf kicks are great. Her plum clinch is strong. I mean, she beat up Souza, Lavinia Souza, inside the clinch with knees, elbows. She can grapple. She does have a judo background. She has, we've seen it hit some nice throws, got some great top game, mean ground and pound, and she is a submission threat. She hit that beautiful sub on Michelle Waterson, that beautiful guillotine. This fight, what would you say the betting line was? I think like
Rodriguez minus 210. So yeah, a little bit over.
I'm surprised. I think it should be much closer. I think it should be. I'm not surprised with Rodriguez, but she's won. She's been in main events, kind of the bigger name. But I expected it to be like negative 130.
Yeah.
Lemos is probably the more well-rounded fighter. That said, I'm going to take Rodriguez due to her improved takedown defense. Also, Eden, you mentioned that a key to victory for Lemos could be wrestling. I agree with that. I think that's her best avenue for victory. But she has really abandoned her wrestling. Like, she has not looked for takedowns lately. Again, she's probably been the better striker other than Jessica Andrade recently. So maybe that might be the reason why. Lemos is probably the faster one on the feet, but Rodriguez, I'd say, is the more technical one, and she's a stronger. She should have the edge in the range. Adding some leg kicks, being bigger in the clinch. Give me Rodriguez in a close. I think I'm going to take her by decision. I think both women will have their moments. Like, I think we're going to have a war on our hands, but I'm going to say Rodriguez, just bigger, stronger. Give me her by unanimous decision.
Awesome. So that's 2 picks for Rodriguez by decision. But if you tell me after the fight that somebody got a knockout in the first 2.5 rounds, I'm thinking it's probably Lemos. That just
I think
was something big. Or you think it'd be Rodriguez?
I think I think it go either way. I think either one could catch the other one. I think it's a fantastic fight. I really do.
It's a great fight, and again, just if it doesn't end in a freakish injury, that's all we ask for the remainder of this year. Like,
yes, please.
There have been so many. That's it. The Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 214, Rodriguez versus Lemos. I have been your host, Ben Duffy. He has been your expert, Keith Shillen. If this is your first time watching one of our previews, first of all, thank you. We hope you enjoyed it. We do try to deliver a pleasing mix of background, backstory, actual analysis, and the occasional humorous asides or historical flashbacks. Please like, subscribe, leave us a comment. Keith and I both respond to those comments. We'd love to hear your takes on these fights. If you think we're out of our minds, if you want to be the one that calls for the Maxim Grishin
upset win, you put that in there. We will definitely shout you out on the recap. And the recap is what I wanted to get to because please do join us. Keith and I will be live on the Sherdog YouTube page right after the main event, usually, 10, 15 minutes after, where we will break down all 13 of these fights. Keith takes the captain's chair. I get to just sit around and make jokes. Well, but we do react to all these fights from the top down, talk about what was good, what was bad, what was surprising, what was controversial, and what's next for some of these fighters, the winners as well as the losers. The live chat is open during those recaps, so we are taking your questions and your takes in real time, and we'd love to have you join us. It is pretty much our favorite part of both of our jobs here at Sherdog, and we'd love to have you join the party. Between now and then, thank you once again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your week, and by all means, enjoy the fights.